Kenshin Himura, a swordsman who went from being a terrifying manslayer to becoming a guy who would apologize to his rice bowl if he eats too fast. Even his sword took a vow to pacifism, as the man kept on struggling to have a peaceful life in the Meiji era of Japanese history. Our story begins with the Shinsengumi charging at an assassin known as Hidekiri Badasai, only to meet the same fate as their predecessors who tried the same. The feared assassin, with his exceptional swordsmanship and relentless nature, proved to be an almost invincible foe. The battlefield was strewn with fallen samurai, a testament to Badasai's lethal prowess. Eager to join the fray, the vice commander of the Shinsengumi, Akita Soji, tried to charge at the Badasai. His determination was evident, but his superior, Hajime Seidu, stopped him. Seidu was deeply concerned about Akita's lung disease, which had been worsening. Instead, Seidu, known for his exceptional sword skills and tactical mind, decided to confront Badasai himself. The tension was palpable as the two warriors faced each other, ready to test their mettle. Fast forward a few years to 1878, a time of change and modernization in Japan. The era of the samurai was fading, giving way to the Meiji era. Amidst this backdrop, a certain Himura Kenshin was wandering the streets of downtown Tokyo. His peaceful stroll was interrupted by the head of the Kamiya dojo, Kamiya Kaoru. Mistaking Kenshin for the infamous Hidekiri Badasai, who she believed was still on a killing spree, she confronted him with righteous indignation. Kaoru's accusations were met with a confused look from Kenshin, who seemed oblivious to the sword abolishment decree. Her anger intensified when Kenshin, dodging her attacks, fell and hit his head. It was then that Kaoru realized Kenshin was an aimless wanderer, akin to a leaf blown by the winds of fate. To her astonishment, his sword was a sakabato, a reverse blade with no trace of blood. With this revelation, Kaoru had no choice but to let Kenshin go. Before she could, however, police whistles echoed through the streets. A massive man was causing chaos, terrorizing police officers who assumed he was the Hidekiri Badasai due to his sheer power. Kaoru, driven by a sense of duty, rushed in with her wooden sword, only to be slashed on her left shoulder and pinned against a wall. Kenshin intervened just in time, saving her from the brute's wrath. The bandit, claiming to be Himura Badasai of the Kamiya Kenshin Ryu, retreated as more officers arrived. Kaoru, enraged by his words, wanted to pursue him, but Kenshin stood in her way, concerned about her injury. Kaoru was more troubled by the tarnished reputation of her father's dojo. The imposter's actions were sullying her father's legacy and the school's honor. Despite understanding her plight, Kenshin refused to let her pursue the bandit in her injured state. Once at her dojo, Kenshin learned about the Kamiya Kenshin style's background and how the imposter's actions had driven away all its disciples and scared others from even approaching the dojo. The name Hidekiri Badasai still struck fear into people's hearts, even in the Meiji era. The false association with her school was damaging her father's legacy, compelling Kaoru to resolve the issue. Kenshin, empathizing with Kaoru, supported her but advised caution, reminding her of the beating she had taken. Kaoru was determined to spread the Kamiya Kenshin style to counter deadly swordsmanship. Her father's death in the Satsuma Rebellion, fighting for the imperial forces, weighed heavily on her. Yet, she remained committed to his dream, standing against anyone who might tarnish his name. Despite her resolve, Kenshin warned her to never let her guard down and avoid wandering alone at night. He knew her father wouldn't want his last hope of preserving his swordsmanship to perish in vain. After Kenshin left, Kihei finished bandaging Kaoru's wound and advised her to stay away from Kenshin, labeling wanderers as failures. Days later, while shopping with Kihei, Kaoru saw a red-headed samurai, Kenshin, being arrested for carrying a sword. The officer immediately linked her to that dojo with the Hidekiri Badasai. Kaoru vehemently defended her dojo, arguing with the officer despite the threat of arrest. Kihei resolved the issue with a bribe. Kenshin expressed gratitude, but Kaoru wondered why he was still in town. Kenshin asked her about any leads on the Crossroad Killer. Kaoru mentioned a former dojo in a nearby town turned den for gamblers and thugs, run by a washed-up samurai matching the suspect's description. Their conversation was cut short by Kihei, who was heading home to make dinner. Since her father's death, Kihei had lived at the dojo, often urging Kaoru to sell it for a more peaceful life. Unbeknownst to her, this was a precursor to a larger betrayal. Kaoru, oblivious to Kihei's true intentions, continued helping those in need, including Kenshin. Before Kenshin could leave, she thanked him for saving her and apologized for seeing him as just a wanderer. Kenshin, misinterpreting her red face as a fever, continued his quest to find the imposter Badasai with new clues from Kaoru. That night, Kenshin arrived at the old dojo, seeking entry in a playful manner, annoying the thugs inside. After a brief exchange, Kenshin confirmed Kaoru's clues were accurate but found himself surrounded by thugs. Meanwhile, Kaoru's silence was broken by Kihei, who again urged her to sell the dojo. When she refused, Kihei revealed forged documents, needing her stamp to claim the estate. To Kaoru's horror, Haruma Gohei, the massive killer, and other thugs arrived, revealing Kihei's deceit. Kaoru tried to fight back but was no match for Haruma's strength. Just as Kihei thought he had won, Kenshin arrived, chiding Kaoru's naivety yet choosing to stand by her. The thugs attacked, unaware they faced the true Hidekiri Badasai, whose legendary skills were rooted in the Sengo Kyujidai. Kaoru was shocked by this revelation, but Gohei was eager to fight such a formidable foe. Kenshin swiftly defeated Gohei, much to Kihei's terror. Kihei, seeing his brother's defeat, lost consciousness in fear as he wet himself. After destroying the forged documents and apologizing for his deception, Kenshin prepared to leave the dojo. Kaoru insisted he stay, arguing she needed his help to revive the dojo and asking for his real name. Initially resistant, Kenshin relented, impressed by her sincerity, and introduced himself as Kenshin Himura. Thus, the heroic tale of Kenshin Himura began, with a new chapter in his life unfolding as he stood beside Kaoru to rebuild her father's legacy and protect those in need. But not without Kaoru realizing that Kenshin must be in his 30 seconds. Now that a week had passed since the Crossroad Killer was apprehended, Kaoru faced a pressing challenge: how to attract new disciples to her dojo. Her source of wisdom came from none other than Kenshin, who observed that the new era brought significant changes. He noted that people were struggling to reconnect with the traditional ways of swordsmanship, a reality that Kaoru found frustrating. Her irritation grew when she contemplated Kenshin's youthful appearance, only to be bewildered by his uncertainty about his own age. Whether he was 28, 30, or even as old as your uncle seemed absurdly ambiguous to her. Later that day, while Kenshin reassured Kaoru that students would return eventually, an unexpected incident occurred. A young boy tried to pickpocket Kenshin on a bridge. Kaoru quickly caught the boy and retrieved Kenshin's wallet. The boy, defiantly, called Kaoru ugly, sparking her annoyance. Kenshin, witnessing the tension, attempted to calm the situation by voluntarily offering his wallet to the boy before walking away. However, the boy, unwilling to accept what he perceived as pity, threw the wallet back at Kenshin. Introducing himself as Myojin Yahiko, he claimed to be a descendant of a Tokyo samurai, and insisted he did not need anyone's pity. Despite Yahiko's bravado, Kenshin saw through his lies but recognized his resilient spirit, apologizing for underestimating him. After this encounter, Kenshin and Kaoru continued to wander through the city. Kaoru's curiosity about Kenshin's attachment to his sword grew, particularly since many imperialists had abandoned their weapons post-Satsuma rebellion to take up government roles. Before she could voice her thoughts, Kenshin offered to answer any questions she had. Kaoru, not wanting to appear vulnerable, swiftly changed the topic, asking him to hide his sword. Kenshin reassured her that it wasn't a significant issue, given the recent enforcement of the sword abolishment decree, which only added to Kaoru's frustration. As they parted ways, Kaoru instructed Kenshin on what to buy from the market. An old man in a luxurious carriage soon approached her, asking for directions to the police station. The sight of such opulence was uncommon in Japanese society, akin to seeing a Tesla in a developing country. The old man inside was preoccupied with rumors about the presence of Hidekiri Badasai in downtown Tokyo. Meanwhile, Yahiko, disheartened, entered an alley and encountered two thugs. It became evident that he had been stealing to pay off debts. The thugs were displeased with Yahiko's defiance and lack of money, leading Gasuke, the larger thug, to beat and humiliate him, threatening dire consequences if he didn't pay by nightfall. Back with Kaoru, she noticed people running in the opposite direction. It turned out that a crowd had gathered to witness an arrest for breaking the sword abolishment law. Kaoru quickly deduced that Kenshin must be involved. She was correct, Kenshin was indeed the one the police struggled to apprehend. Not wanting to cause further trouble, Kenshin was about to surrender until the arrival of the sword-bearing police unit, led by Lieutenant Yujiki, a ruthless officer who abused his authority. Yujiki ignored his comrades' warnings about Kenshin's peaceful intent and pressed for his arrest. Kenshin remained composed, refusing to draw his sword despite Yujiki's provocations. When Kaoru arrived, Yujiki saw an opportunity to manipulate the situation, blackmailing Kenshin into drawing his blade. With townsfolk feeling increasingly threatened by Yujiki's squad, who legally could kill anyone carrying a sword, Kenshin finally drew his own, not to comply but to protect Kaoru and the townspeople. Seizing the moment, Yujiki attacked, claiming self-defense. At the same time, Yamagata Eramoto, the officer from the carriage, received word that his information on Himura Badasai had been incorrect. Yamagata had wanted to meet Kenshin earlier but was delayed by his duties in the Satsuma Rebellion. Having known Kenshin since the Boshin War, Yamagata was aware that Kenshin had never used his sword for personal gain, seeing it as a duty in the imperialist cause. Kenshin was considered a national hero among imperialists, and Yamagata sought to offer him a high-ranking position in the newly established Japanese Empire. Meanwhile, Chief Uramura briefed Yamagata on the recent capture of the Crossroad Killer's thugs, though they still didn't know who had apprehended them, only that the real deal got them. Another officer interrupted with urgent news of a fight in downtown Tokyo, involving a sword-bearing unit led by an imperialist from Satsuma. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Eramoto rushed outside to assess the scene, especially upon learning that a samurai with red hair and a cross-shaped scar was involved. By then, the situation had escalated. Kenshin had incapacitated most of the police officers, leaving only a handful, including Yujiki, still standing. The townspeople cheered as Kenshin defeated multiple attackers simultaneously. Enraged by Kenshin's prowess, Yujiki launched an all-out attack, risking his pride. Aramoto, arriving at the scene, recognized the futility of Yujiki's efforts, as his swordsmanship was no match for Kenshin's. The crowd celebrated Kenshin's decisive victory, but Aramoto was even more thrilled to reunite with his old comrade. Kaoru was surprised to learn that Aramoto knew Kenshin, especially since Aramoto was the prime minister of the imperial government. Aramoto invited Kenshin to join him in his carriage, promising a bright future for his service during the Boshin War. Kenshin, however, declined, stating he had no interest in becoming a self-serving officer. He was content to have fought alongside Aramoto to bring a new era to Japan, but believed his purpose was fulfilled and wished not to spill any more blood. Aramoto wasn't fully convinced, arguing that the new era brought different opportunities and that Kenshin should secure a place for himself. Kenshin, however, remained resolute, asserting that he could still contribute to Japan and protect those he cared about with his sword. As Kenshin and Kaoru walked away, Aramoto instructed Uemura to overlook Kenshin's case. Uemura, without hesitation, agreed, having realized how wrong he was about Kenshin after the crossroad killing case. Kaoru, unfazed by her ribbon being ruined, felt glad to understand Kenshin a bit more. Yahiko, on the other hand, couldn't shake the recent events from his mind. When he saw an elderly woman drop her wallet, he contemplated stealing it but ultimately decided to return it, much to the woman's relief. That evening, Yahiko practiced swordsmanship by the river when the thugs returned, demanding their money. Inspired by Kenshin's chivalry, Yahiko refused to pay and declared he would sever ties with the Yakuza. Despite Gasuke's brutal assault, Yahiko's resolve remained unbroken, prompting Gasuke to take his time asserting his dominance. While this was going on, Kaoru was heading back home from a long day of training herself, wondering if Kenshin had already prepared the bath for her, only to witness the unsettling sight of Yahiko being taken away by the Yakuza. Her heart sank at the scene, and she knew she had to act quickly. That night, in the Kanto Shui gang mansion, Yahiko found himself face to face with the gang's boss. The boss argued that the Meiji era had no place for the samurai's honor, pointing out how the wives of once revered daimyos now worked in the red light district. Despite the boss's cynical claims, Yahiko defiantly vowed to uphold his beliefs at any cost. Frustration boiled over as Gasuke and his thugs beat Yahiko, taunting him about his parents' pasts. In a fit of rage, Yahiko bit Gasuke in a sensitive area, fiercely defending his parents' sacrifices. Enraged, Gasuke drew his sword to strike, but Kenshin arrived just in time to save the boy. Kenshin swiftly dealt with the stubborn guards, ensuring they got some rest, and did the same with Gasuke, who repeatedly interrupted his conversation with the Yakuza boss. Intimidated by Kenshin's immense strength, the old man relented to Kenshin's demand to take Yahiko with him. Yahiko, at first, felt offended, thinking Kenshin was belittling him. Not wanting to further hurt the boy's pride, Kenshin suggested taking him to treat his wounds, to which Yahiko reluctantly agreed. At a fair distance from the gang's mansion, Yahiko began to bitterly complain about his weakness and his desire to become strong enough to not rely on anyone. Kenshin listened patiently, understanding the boy's frustration. Meanwhile, Kaoru anxiously waited outside her dojo for Kenshin and Yahiko to return. Her worry melted into relief when she saw Kenshin approaching with Yahiko draped over his shoulder. Kenshin introduced Yahiko to Kaoru and reassured the boy that they would see a doctor. Most importantly, Kenshin told Yahiko that Kaoru would be his instructor from this point on. Initially, both Kaoru and Yahiko were against the idea, each disliking the other. However, Kenshin reassured Yahiko that his growth and strength would depend on his own efforts. Convinced, Yahiko agreed, though Kaoru still took issue with Yahiko calling her an old hag. With her first disciple secured, Kaoru began lessons a few days later. Yahiko stubbornly refused to be taught by a woman, leading to a series of squabbles rather than actual training. At Kaoru's request for help, Kenshin insisted it was her responsibility to handle Yahiko's training. To understand Kenshin's stance, we must look back to the day after he rescued Yahiko from the Yakuza. Many people showed interest in learning swordsmanship, exciting Kaoru. However, Kenshin noted that his style differed from what Kaoru taught, causing many to lose interest and leave, except for one injured child. In the present, Kaoru was upset that Kenshin turned down all the potential students. Kenshin explained that those joining out of mere curiosity rather than devotion wouldn't last long. It was better to train someone genuinely willing to learn, even if it took time. Instead of becoming more cooperative, Yahiko's ego grew even larger. He insisted on learning Kenshin's sword style, but Kenshin refused, encouraging him to learn the Kamiya Kashin style while Kenshin supervised. Just as Kenshin finished speaking, the argument between Kaoru and her 10-year-old nemesis resumed. Kaoru, frustrated, searched for Yahiko, who she believed was likely to slack off when ignored. Her complaints were met with a slipper thrown from the dojo roof. Yahiko had returned. Accusing Kaoru of speaking poorly about him behind his back, Yahiko insisted he didn't need her guidance and preferred to study alone. Yahiko also questioned why previous disciples hadn't returned. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of two former students, Hira and Sato seeking shelter from those pursuing them. Before Kaoru could understand what happened, two thugs rushed into the dojo to continue beating Hira and Sato. Angered by strangers causing trouble in her dojo, Kaoru engaged the intruders in a brief skirmish, easily defeating them and impressing Yahiko with her skills. With the immediate problem resolved, Kaoru asked her former students what happened. They explained that they had encountered a drunken group causing havoc. In their attempt to stop the group, their friends turned against them, chasing Hira and Sato through the streets. As they finished explaining, the rest of the gang arrived at the dojo. Concerned for their safety, Kaoru ordered her former students to enter the training room, closing the door behind them. Hachisuka, the gang leader, was pleased, thinking they were now trapped and vulnerable to his wooden cannon. While the Hashimanji Gyurin gang planned their next move, Kaoru felt overwhelmed by her students' predicament, especially since Kenshin was out shopping. Yahiko pointed out that the gang wouldn't attack without reason, noting Hira and Sato, smelling of booze, must have provoked them. Kaoru sought confirmation, and the former students admitted their fault. Before Kaoru could respond, the gang began attacking the dojo, with Hachisuka intent on destroying it. Yahiko suggested handing over the former students, but Hachisuka also targeted Kaoru for sheltering them. Despite Yahiko's protests, Kaoru chose to take the blame to protect her students. Just as Hachisuka was about to strike her, Yahiko knocked him out, moved by Kaoru's selflessness. Their fortunes improved with Kenshin's return. He tried to negotiate the gang's peaceful withdrawal, but Hachisuka, confident in his wooden cannon, refused. Despite warnings from his gang members about Kenshin's power, Hachisuka remained defiant. Unbeknownst to him, Kenshin effortlessly slashed the cannonball, shocking Hachisuka and forcing him to order a retreat. With the immediate threat gone, Kenshin learned about the events leading up to the conflict. He concluded that the former students could go home but should forget their connection to the dojo and promise never to hold swords again. They agreed, and as they left, Kaoru urged Hira to see a doctor for his wound. Deep down, Kaoru was saddened by what had happened to her old students. Thankfully, Kenshin was there to support her. Surprisingly, Yahiko, moved by the events, decided to become Kaoru's first student. This marked a new beginning for the Kamiya Kenshin dojo, with Kamiya Kaoru as the acting master, Yahiko Myojin as her first student, and Himura Kenshin as the wandering swordsman who had found a place to belong. That night, however, the Hashimanji Gyurin gang members were beaten down by another powerful figure. They begged for their lives, and the mysterious individual, bored with the encounter, pondered if they would ever meet a worthy adversary. The next day, Yahiko was training diligently, but his rhythm was disrupted by Kenshin chopping wood nearby. Frustrated, Yahiko complained that Kenshin's precise, professional sword technique was making his own practice feel inadequate. In the midst of this, Kaoru burst in, beaming with excitement. She declared that they no longer had to worry about their financial situation. One might wonder if she had decided to give up on the dojo and start a new business, or perhaps dabbled in some new age investment like crypto NFTs. Yahiko, ever the skeptic, even joked that her ugliness had finally affected her brain. In reality, Kaoru had stumbled upon an old ink painting by her grandfather that was worth a fortune. Despite her elation, she couldn't resist hitting Yahiko on the head, even while she was on cloud 9. She eagerly planned for them to celebrate with a lavish meal at a beef hot pot restaurant. As they discussed their good fortune, Kaoru, along with her homeless bodyguard Kenshin, who was often mistaken for her boyfriend, and the defiant Yahiko, arrived at the restaurant. They were ready to indulge in a fancy lunch. Kenshin, however, quickly noticed a group of democratic rights movement activists arguing and drinking nearby. As the trio was about to order drinks, a bottle hit Kenshin on the back of the head. Tensions escalated between the activists, prompting Yahiko to confront them and demand an apology for Kenshin. The activists, proud and intoxicated, refused, which further escalated the situation. When a waitress tried to calm things down, the drunkards pushed her, but Sagara Sanosuke, a mysterious figure from the previous night, intervened, catching her just in time. With the waitress now safe, Sanosuke decided to handle the activists himself, challenging them to step outside for a fight. Kenshin tried to dissuade Sanosuke, suggesting it would be better to avoid the confrontation. But Yahiko insisted that the activists had asked for it and should face the consequences. The biggest of the trio attacked Sanosuke with a sentetsu, a small weapon meant for surprise. However, Sanosuke effortlessly reversed the attack, leaving the activist injured. The remaining activists, unable to back down, urged Sanosuke to give them his best. Sanosuke hesitated, not wanting to bully them, and instead defeated one activist with just a single finger, astonishing everyone and knocking his opponent out cold. Infuriated by their friend's defeat, one activist drew his sword to attack Sanosuke. Kenshin swiftly intervened, warning the activist that he wouldn't hesitate to draw his own sword if necessary. Kenshin pointed out that they should focus on fixing themselves before trying to fix the government. Intimidated by Sanosuke's display of power in Kenshin's presence, the activists decided to back down. The waitress, thanked Sanosuke for his heroism. However, Sanosuke directed his gratitude to Kenshin for protecting Kaoru's pretty face by blocking the bottle aimed at him. Sanosuke admired Kenshin's humility despite his immense power and invited him to a challenge. Kenshin declined the offer, but Sanosuke remained determined that they would fight someday. As Sanosuke left, Kenshin noticed the word bad written on the back of his jacket. While Kaoru and Yahiko wondered about its meaning, T reminded them that Sanosuke hadn't paid his bill, leaving someone else to cover it. That night, Sanosuke was approached by the Haruma brothers, who had escaped from jail and previously tried to force Kaoru to sell her father's dojo. They sought his help to defeat Kenshin. Despite feeling used as a hitman, Sanosuke agreed after learning his opponent was the legendary Hidakiri Badasai. The next morning, the Haruma brothers grew uneasy as Sanosuke didn't show up. They assumed he had chickened out and abandoned them. However, Sanosuke soon appeared, beating Gohei for his nagging complaints and his attempt to cosplay as Sanosuke. Sanosuke took his gear and headed straight to Kaoru's dojo. Inside, Kenshin sensed a straightforward presence and went to the gate to investigate. To Kaoru and Yahiko's surprise, it was Sanosuke. Kenshin tried to defuse the situation with humor, but Sanosuke was serious. He made it clear that he was hired to fight Kenshin, the infamous Hidakiri Badasai. Kenshin was taken aback by how much Sanosuke knew about his past as an assassin during the Boshin War, a past that made him both a hero and a target. Sanosuke, however, was frustrated and couldn't comprehend why Kenshin left that life for a wandering existence. Regardless, Sanosuke was ready for a fair fight. Kihei, convinced that Sanosuke couldn't defeat Kenshin, devised a backup plan. He expected Sanosuke to weaken Kenshin, allowing Kihei to finish him off with a revolver once Kenshin's guard was down. Kenshin was curious why a strong fighter like Sanosuke bore the word bad while engaging in bullying. Sanosuke, reminded of someone from his past, chose to fight nonetheless. He harbored deep hatred for imperialists, viewing them as hypocrites. Seeing Sanosuke's determination, Kenshin agreed to the duel. Before starting, Kenshin asked if the Haruma brothers were behind the fight. Sanosuke admitted it, much to the brothers' shock. Kenshin's ability to deduce their involvement was simply Kenshin being Kenshin. Fearing threats from both Kenshin and their client, the brothers reluctantly showed themselves. Disgusted by their lack of honor, Sanosuke took their revolver and made it clear that this was now his fight. Kaoru, attempting to check on Kihei, was threatened, leaving her disappointed. Sanosuke concluded that the dojo was too cramped for their duel and suggested moving to the river's edge. Kenshin quickly agreed. On the way, Kenshin noted Yahiko's surprise at learning about his past but appreciated that the boy didn't find him intimidating. When Yahiko asked Kenshin the same question, he received a playful oro, which annoyed him. Upon reaching their destination, Sanosuke revealed his massive Zanbato and introduced himself, intimidating Kaoru and Yahiko with its historic significance. Kenshin remained calm and introduced himself. Sanosuke launched his first attack, destroying Kenshin's sword sheath but failing to harm him. Kenshin swiftly countered, knocking Sanosuke back in one move. Despite Yahiko's excitement, Sanosuke's true strength lay in his ability to withstand blows, making him a formidable opponent for the Hidakiri Badasai. But would that be enough to defeat Kenshin? The fight is now going through an upheaval, and no one was able to get the upper hand over the other. Realizing that, Kihei thought that it would be about time to pull out his move, just as Sanosuke began to prepare for his own attack. A brief silence took over the place that was broken by Sanosuke's attack. Unfortunately for him, Kenshin was able to get into close range, where the Zanbato would be as ineffective as it was large. Capitalizing on that, Kenshin launched several consecutive attacks that knocked Sanosuke on the ground. While Kenshin tried to convince Sanosuke to admit defeat, he began to remember his last memories with Captain Sagara 10 years ago. In Tegajo, the villagers were glad to see the first unit of the Sekiho army, which was led by the imperialist Sagara Sozo, back to the town safe and sound. Along Sagara, there were two boys, Sanosuke and Katsuhiro. The first unit of the Sekiho army is considered to be the vanguard of the imperial army that was formed after the initial decisive victory of the imperialist forces from the Choshu and the Satsuma clans against the pro-shogunate forces during the Battle of Toba Fushimi. Ever since then, the Sekiho army pressed their way across Tsunado to relay the land tax having order declared by the imperialists, much to the latter's dismay. Sozo must have figured that out already, and yet he stood strong by his principles in supporting the poor. This was demonstrated further when he told Sanosuke about people being able to light fire to eat in their homes, while many others were not as lucky. For Sozo, he wanted everyone to live properly and peacefully, which is why he stood against the shogunate, who have oppressed and abused the people for more than 250 years. Sanosuke, who was already the son of a farmer, was deeply touched by such ideas and wholeheartedly embraced it, hoping that one day he could earn a surname, which after a brief talk with his captain, he decided to go with the name Sagara Sanosuke. But behind closed doors, the leaders of the Sekiho army recognized that Emperor Meiji had turned against them, mustering forces against what he deemed a burden to the imperialist cause. After receiving orders from Ohara Shijitomi, the second and third units returned to Kyoto, leaving the first unit to fend for itself. Framed as traitors sabotaging the economy, Sozo decided to make a last stand in Shimasuwa. He ordered Sanosuke and Katsuhiro to stay behind, marking their final farewell to their captain. On March 26, 1868, Katsuhiro informed Sanosuke that Captain Sagara Sozo had been executed by imperialist forces alongside other First Unit members. Despite hoping the news was false, Sanosuke learned that his captain was decapitated after being accused of falsely spreading news about having land taxes. This fueled Sanosuke's bitterness towards the imperialists, awakening him from his coma and driving him to attack Kenshin with renewed vigor. Amidst that, Kihei took advantage of the situation and pulled out another revolver to shoot Kenshin, leaving Kaoru, Yahiko, and Sanosuke in shock as he fell. Luckily, the bullet only hit the sword's guard. Kihei then threatened Kaoru and Yahiko, ordering his brother Gohei to break their legs. Before Gohei could reach them, Sanosuke threw his Zanbato, slashing Gohei's face. Kenshin, on the other hand, managed to beat Kihei into submission too, as he made sure to not beat him hard enough to not get him to lose consciousness. And with that, the duel resumed. Sanosuke spun his Zanbato to gain speed before clashing with Kenshin, to which Kenshin succeeded in breaking the Zanbato and delivering a high strike. Despite that, Sanosuke remained standing, vowing to defeat him as long as he was on his feet. Kenshin responded by punching Sanosuke, trying to knock some sense into him. Sanosuke insisted on seeking revenge for his idol captain against those he saw as betrayers. But thanks to Kaoru and Yahiko's intervention, and Kenshin sounding like Sozo, Sanosuke eventually fell unconscious. The next day, while discussing Sanosuke's injuries, Kaoru and Yahiko eyed Kenshin suspiciously, feeling he was too depressed about his victory. Kaoru argued that Sanosuke had a point, despite not knowing the post-Civil War Kenshin. To lighten the mood, Kaoru took Kenshin and Yahiko to the Akabiko restaurant, only to find the same drunken activist being thrown out. And oh boy, what do you know? A badly injured Sanosuke is causing trouble again, insisting his wounds didn't hurt. To test the validity of his claims, the trio decided to merely poke him, which sent painful shockwaves all over Sanosuke's body. But keeping all these silly talks aside, Kenshin was relieved to learn that Sanosuke had made peace with his past, and now he decided to shadow Kenshin to figure out how different he is from all the other imperialist frauds. In other words, he decided to become a self-proclaimed stalker. For better or worse, he admitted that he has abandoned his old name of Zanza, and that he's just a plain old Sagara Sanosuke, just like how Himura Kenshin abandoned being Hidakiri Badasai. Now that tensions have pretty much eased between the two, there was just one problem left for Kenshin and his friends to handle. Yes, that's right, the unpaid bill of Sanosuke. Elsewhere on a stormy night, a certain government official was standing next to the window, horrified that all of his guards were lying dead next to him, while an assassin was standing right in front of him. Despite all of his pleads and offers, nothing was able to prevent him from his ultimate demise. With the conflict between Sanosuke and Kenshin resolved, a new argument erupted between Sanosuke and Kaoru, this time over her cooking. Sanosuke criticized Kaoru's culinary skills, offering to teach her how to cook. Kenshin, ever the peacekeeper, defended Kaoru's cooking, claiming it was getting tastier. Annoyed by Sanosuke's comments, Kaoru began throwing anything she could find at him, while Sanosuke, in a humorous display, used Kenshin as a human shield. In the midst of this chaos, Chief Uramura arrived to speak with a battered Kenshin. He sought Kenshin's help with a matter of great importance to the police's reputation. Uramura needed Kenshin to assist in capturing a notorious hooligan known as Kirigasa, who was targeting former imperialists now involved in politics, economics, and government. Kirigasa's reputation as a top-tier assassin from the Boshin War made his threats particularly alarming. Uramura explained that Kirigasa's specific targeting of imperialists suggested a deep-seated grudge against the government, making him a significant threat. Even more concerning was Kirigasa's apparent enjoyment of his killing spree. One raid left 90 casualties, including police officers and guards. Disturbing reports described Kirigasa drawing his sword faster than the police could ready their guns, and those who tried to attack or flee were inexplicably frozen in terror, left defenseless against his blade. Kenshin, hearing this detail, deduced the technique Kirigasa was using. Despite Kaoru's concerns for his safety, Kenshin agreed to help, accompanied by Sanosuke. Their mission was to protect Tani, an imperialist official, from Kirigasa. Tani, however, was stubborn and insulted by Chief Uramura's attempts to make him reconsider his security arrangements. Although Tani had already hired numerous bodyguards, Uramura insisted on additional reinforcements. Tani mocked this idea, confident in his men's superiority. However, when Kenshin entered, reminding Tani of his past service as a bodyguard during the Bakumatsu era, and Sanosuke, recalling his previous victories over Tani's fighters, Tani quickly changed his tune and welcomed them. Uramura decided to increase the guards outside the mansion for added safety. As the expected time of Kirigasa's arrival approached, Kenshin and Sanosuke passed the time playing shogi and discussing the assassin's potential appearance. Kenshin hoped Kirigasa wouldn't show up, a sentiment Sanosuke shared. Kenshin's goal was to stop Kirigasa's evil deeds to save lives, including Kirigasa, while Sanosuke was simply eager for a fight. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden scream. Realizing the guards outside the mansion had been incapacitated, Kenshin and Sanosuke fortified the defenses around Tani. They stood poised, waiting for Kirigasa to enter. Just as one guard relaxed, thinking the threat had passed, Kirigasa slashed the guard's back, making a dramatic entrance through the window. Disappointed by the lack of people to fight, Kirigasa was still determined to take down everyone present. Kenshin stepped forward to handle Kirigasa alone, while Sanosuke protected Tani with the other guards. In a panic, Tani ordered his guards to attack Kirigasa, promising them government positions and luxurious lives if they succeeded. Despite Kenshin and Sanosuke's attempts to dissuade the men, they charged forward and were swiftly cut down by Kirigasa. Sanosuke was stunned by Kirigasa's speed, and as he tried to warn the remaining guards, Kirigasa's presence froze everyone in place. Impressed that Sanosuke could still move, albeit slowly, Kirigasa took notice, just as Kenshin appeared and attacked, verifying Kirigasa's deadly reputation firsthand. Realizing he was facing Himura Badasai, Kirigasa attempted to petrify Kenshin too. Surprisingly, Kenshin resisted the effect, matching his opponent's sword aura. Kirigasa, however, moved quickly, aiming to kill Tani. Before he could strike, Sanosuke broke free from the Shin no Ippon effect, rushing towards Tani and breaking Kirigasa's katana with a powerful punch. Undeterred, Kirigasa used the broken sword to pierce Sanosuke's arm, relishing the pain he inflicted. Kenshin intervened just in time, throwing Kirigasa off. Now injured, armless, and outnumbered, Kirigasa decided to retreat, but not before warning Kenshin that he was his next target and would come after him soon. With Kirigasa gone, Kenshin asked Yuramura to tend to the wounded, including Sanosuke and the fallen guards, hoping to save them in time. Kenshin had anticipated becoming a target on Kirigasa's list, though he wished they could settle the matter then and there. At dawn, Kenshin and Sanosuke headed home. Sanosuke was relieved there were no fatalities, but Kenshin's desire for zero casualties annoyed him. With the crisis over, Sanosuke wanted to learn about Kirigasa's sword style, the Nikaido Hyo, known for its creepiness and fearsome reputation. There were also rumors about the Shin no Ippo, said to be usable only by its original founder, surprising Kenshin to see it in action. Despite Kirigasa's danger, Sanosuke remained optimistic. After all, they had the most powerful swordsman in Japan on their side. What could possibly go wrong? However, Kenshin warned that the task was not as easy as Sanosuke imagined. After 10 brutal years of slaughter during the Boshin War, Kenshin had vowed never to take another life. Yet, there were others like Kirigasa who continued down the violent path. Kenshin knew little about how Kirigasa had refined his techniques, only that he had first emerged as part of the Shinsengumi in Kyoto, fighting on the shogunate's side. However, Kirigasa's actions had caused more harm than good, and his numerous atrocities surpassed even those of the Shinsengumi. When the unit tried to discipline him, he killed his captor and fled. Months later, he reappeared as a ruthless manslayer for the Imperialists. In essence, Kirigasa had no ideals, causes, or moral compass. Understanding that Kirigasa's only purpose was to kill, Sanosuke finally grasped the situation's gravity. Kenshin, not wanting anyone else involved, claimed the manslayer was solely after him. However, he asked Sanosuke to take care of Kaoru and Yahiko in his absence. As the morning sun rose, Sanosuke was dismayed to see Kaoru drooling in her sleep. Yahiko explained she hadn't slept out of worry for Kenshin. Seizing the moment, Sanosuke tried to wake her by making funny faces, amusing Yahiko. Unfortunately, karma struck as Kaoru woke up and hit them both on the head. Realizing Kenshin hadn't returned, Sanosuke explained the entire story to her. Fearing she might lose Kenshin, Kaoru decided to follow him to the riverbank, despite Sanosuke's warnings. As she left, Yahiko and Sanosuke talked about Kaoru's attachment to Kenshin before resuming their activities. Unbeknownst to them, Kirigasa had been eavesdropping the whole time. At the riverbank, Kenshin pondered his strategy when he sensed a presence nearby. To his surprise, it was Kaoru, not Kirigasa. Reassuring Kenshin that she would stand by him, Kaoru offered her favorite indigo ribbon, making him promise to return it. Just as Kenshin vowed to keep his promise, Kirigasa arrived on a boat and kidnapped Kaoru, aiming to awaken the Badasai within Kenshin. Kenshin was outraged, but would he become the Badasai he once was? Only time would tell. Before losing track of each other, Kirigasa made sure to give Kenshin the location where they should be meeting, in front of the Inari at the town shrine grove, tonight at midnight. While waiting for Kenshin, Kirigasa realized that Kaoru was glaring at him. He knew that she knew why he abducted her and that she's still resentful to him for that. And yet Kirigasa still didn't care, as he only cared about bringing back the old Hidakiri Badasai back to life. As it turned out, Kirigasa Jin encountered Kenshin during the Bakumatsu era and was awed by his ability to defeat all his comrades effortlessly. As Kirigasa lamented his descent into darkness, Kenshin arrived. Kaoru was initially glad to see him but was unsettled by the anger and vengefulness in his eyes, which contrasted sharply with his usual demeanor. It seems Kirigasa has achieved his objective. Without further ado, the fight began. Kenshin and Kirigasa matched their attacks blow for blow, with the former nullifying the Shin no Ippon attack of Kirigasa as easily as he did before. Witnessing this, Kaoru felt unsettled by this different Kenshin that she had never seen before. As for Kenshin, he began to read the Nikaido Haido movement, dodging them at first, before outright disrupting the attack in the end. Just as Kenshin was about to land the coup de grace, however, Kirigasa managed to stab Kenshin's shoulder before knocking him to the ground, despite him already winning just like his father had hoped. Kirigasa thought that that's not enough. In order to get Kenshin to get more upset, he casted a stronger Shin no Ippo on her, so much so that she may die from suffocation in the next 2 minutes. Kirigasa reached a pivotal moment as he saw Kenshin move with such speed that he couldn't track his attacks. Despite the pain from his injury, Kirigasa was excited to witness the return of the old Hidakiri Badasai, prompting him to push his limits. However, when he charged at Kenshin, the intense aura around him made Kirigasa hesitate, revealing his underlying fear. Kenshin, recognizing Kirigasa's facade, attempted to negotiate for Kaoru's release from the Shin no Ippo, but found it nearly impossible, regardless of the outcome of their battle. To make matters worse for Kenshin, Kirigasa put himself under strong hypnosis to unleash his full potential, but Kenshin remained unfazed as he prepared for his lethal attack. Intimidated by Kenshin's stance, Kirigasa briefly considered dodging, unaware he was being lured into a trap. Instead of using his Sakabato, Kenshin struck with his sheath, breaking Kirigasa's right arm beyond repair. With Kenshin securing his victory, Kirigasa stood at the mercy of Kenshin. Initially, Kenshin was reluctant to strike, before Kirigasa began to manipulate him to strike. Before Kenshin could finish off his opponent, Kaoru managed to break off the Nishi no Ippo. Hearing her voice, and seeing Kaoru cry, Kenshin resorted to his peaceful self once again. No! 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 Managing to catch Kaoru before she fell down. Kirigasa stood up with his sword, and Kenshin anticipated a backstab. Instead, Kirigasa chose to peace out to become the king of the afterlife, refusing to surrender to the authorities. He explained that he could not allow the imperialist government to track other Hidakiris. Although the civil war had ended externally, the internal power struggle continued, making Badasais like him and Kenshin still necessary. Rather than pursue his mission, Kirigasa challenged Kenshin to confirm that the Hidakiri within him was still alive, and he was pleased to find he was right. With this ordeal over, Kenshin decided to finally head back to the dojo with Kaoru. On their way back home, the two couldn't help but thank each other for being saved in this struggle, as Kenshin saved Kaoru's life, while Kaoru saved Kenshin from ever coming back to his old self. Oh, Kenshin also didn't forget to give the indigo ribbon back to Kaoru as promised, to which it was tarnished with blood. Kenshin argued that it couldn't be helped that happened after his injury, but Kaoru got so upset that she began running after Kenshin. With the rise of the new sun, Kenshin overcame a major crossroad in his new path, for now that is. It was a new day, and it couldn't start without Kaoru looking out for where Kenshin was. As she began to worry that he had left the dojo, Yahiko came in to inform her that her beloved vagabond was outside with Sanosuke, much to her relief. Yahiko, on his part, thought that Kaoru was trying to keep Kenshin on a leash, like a master and pet relationship of some sort. To get your thoughts back on track, let's take a brief look at what Kenshin and Sanosuke had been up to during this time. Kenshin had accompanied Sanosuke, who was eager to participate in a gambling game. Sanosuke brought his unassuming friend along because Kenshin's predictions had helped him win repeatedly. Kenshin, however, was disappointed to learn that the huge problem Sanosuke mentioned was just a gambling session. Despite Kenshin's skepticism about the legality of gambling, Sanosuke assured him that it was nothing like the shady dealings where people steal each other's money. Instead, all the players were Sanosuke's friends, and they had nothing to lose but time for some fun. After some persuasion, Kenshin relented and began to smile. Good times didn't last long. When Sanosuke inquired about the whereabouts of one of his friends, he was shocked to learn that the friend had passed away. The cause wasn't an accident or illness, but opium. Sanosuke was against opium usage and was outraged by the news of his friend's death. Kenshin sensed something strange. Opium was incredibly expensive, beyond the means of ordinary folks like Sanosuke's friend. Their conversation was interrupted by the entrance of a lady who had spent the beginning of the episode running from some people. In the midst of the chaos, Megumi, the runaway lady, jumped at Kenshin for protection just as her pursuers arrived. While Sanosuke evacuated his friends, he punched one of the intruders, who remarked that the private army of Kanryu deserved better treatment. Despite his friends' worries about Kanryu Takeda, Kenshin remained unaware of who he was. Sanosuke described Kanryu as a young entrepreneur on the outskirts of town, deeply entrenched in the opium trade in Tokyo. He was involved with the Yakuza and had become so powerful that even other Yakuza groups and the police avoided him. Sanosuke suspected Megumi's involvement with Kanryu's illicit activities, but she strongly denied the accusation. Unexpectedly, a gnome-like figure named Bishimi appeared in the room, accusing Megumi of being a liar. Bishimi made it clear that even if Kanryu couldn't keep an eye on her, his superior was already watching. Megumi tried to act tough while two of Sanosuke's friends approached Bishimi. A fatal mistake, as Bishimi struck them with bullets using his bare hands, promising to break Megumi's legs with his Senjiki Reisenbyo bullets next time. Kenshin intervened, stopping the bullets from reaching Megumi and declaring that he would protect anyone who sought his help. Before Bishimi could attack again, Kenshin and Sanosuke charged at him, knocking him unconscious. Seeing Kenshin and Sanosuke's strength, Megumi suggested they protect her for a payment. Sanosuke refused, insisting she explain her situation first. As she tried to free her hands, 3 pieces of paper fell from her kimono, identified by Sanosuke's friend as opium. With her cover blown, Megumi had to reveal the truth. As evening approached, Kaoru worried about Kenshin and Sanosuke's long absence, imagining all sorts of troubles, including losing everything while gambling. Just as her thoughts turned more deviant, Kenshin arrived. Kaoru was initially glad to see him but was shocked to find he and Sanosuke had brought a woman with them. Kenshin intended to explain, but Sanosuke stopped him, creating a cover story instead. Kenshin was outraged but relented, not wanting to involve Kaoru and Yahiko in opium-related troubles. Kaoru was skeptical and asked Kenshin to confirm. Terrified of her, and with Sanosuke warning him about the dangers of revealing the truth, Kenshin agreed to the cover story but was punished by Kaoru for allegedly getting involved in human trafficking. Megumi began to throw herself at Kenshin, pretending to be fond of him, causing a scene that disturbed young Yahiko. Kaoru censored it by knocking Yahiko unconscious. Annoyed by Megumi's advances and Sanosuke's teasing, Kaoru kicked everyone, except Yahiko, out of the dojo. Sanosuke blamed Megumi for triggering Kaoru, but she didn't care, seeing Kenshin as a good-natured man to stick to for protection. Kenshin and Sanosuke asked Megumi about her connection to Kanryu and opium. She refused to divulge details, frustrating Sanosuke. While this was happening, Shu, Sanosuke's friend, informed them that Megumi's pursuers were found dead in the river. At the bridge, Kenshin spotted 3 notorious figures: Bishimi, Kanryu Takeda, and most importantly, Shinomori Ayashi. Kenshin sensed Ayashi was the most dangerous. Ayashi, based on Bishimi's report, confirmed Kenshin's presence. Bishimi attempted to attack Kenshin and Megumi, but Kanryu intervened, worried about his public image. Ayashi remarked that Bishimi couldn't defeat Kenshin alone and tasked Hanyu with finding Kenshin and Megumi, stressing no room for failure. Kanryu, contrasting with Ayashi, believed in eradicating wasteful and useless men. Despite Megumi being a thorn, he couldn't afford to eliminate her as she produced valuable opium for him. Megumi recognized Kanryu's henchmen, while Kenshin fixated on Ayashi, sensing the main threat. Sanosuke assumed Ayashi was Kanryu's private army leader, but Megumi revealed he led a separate unit known as the Oniwabanshu, former shogunate ninjas now working for Kanryu. That night, Kenshin discussed Kanryu's organization with Megumi, but she refused to disclose the opium source, only providing necessary information for combat. Deep down, she planned to escape the dojo. Overhearing their conversation, Kaoru was caught by Sanosuke, worried Kenshin might fall for Megumi. Sanosuke reassured Kaoru that Kenshin's helpful nature was innocent. As for Sanosuke, his motive was avenging his friend. Meanwhile, Kenshin revealed Kanryu's operations and anticipated Oniwabanshu's arrival. He promised Kaoru to keep her safe. Suddenly, Yahiko burst in, upset about being left out of Kenshin's plans. Reflecting on her family, Megumi was interrupted by an explosion. As expected, Hayatoko, an Oniwabanshu member, demanded Kenshin to hand over Megumi. When he entered the dojo, Hayatoko was so confident to take both Sanosuke and Kenshin at once. He underplayed their strength, however, believing that he's invincible. Seeing that the intruder has no opponents, Sanosuke thought of handling him on his own, as Hayatoko has no weapons. He even ignored Kenshin's advice to take caution. He managed to punch the intruder, but he was oblivious that Hayatoko had a flamethrower deep inside his body. Sanosuke narrowly escaped the fire, while Bishimi, hidden from view, was pleased to see his friend. Before Hayatoko could breathe fire again, Kenshin intervened, successfully diverting Hayatoko's attention. Despite Kenshin's claims, he found that he could slice through the flames but was still hit. As this fight was taking place, Megumi attempted to exploit the opportunity to escape, only for Kaoru to come in her way. She argued that Kenshin is fighting her fight, so she must stand and watch it through. Megumi, however, argued that Kenshin is merely buying time for her, as he can't end up defeating the Oniwabanshu no matter how hard he tries. Despite that, Kaoru held firm on her belief that Kenshin would emerge victorious. serious. I was waiting for them to bet some actual money on who will win, but it is what it is, I guess. Kenshin successfully repelled Hayatoko's attacks until he ran out of oil. Frustrated, Hayatoko attempted to replenish his supply, but Sanosuke intervened. Despite Kaoru's warnings, Kenshin allowed it. Sanosuke figured out Hayatoko's flame trick and ran through the fire to retrieve the oil tank from his belly. Believing Sanosuke's arm was burned and unusable, Hayatoko prepared to attack. However, Sanosuke surprised him with a decisive kick, securing a spectacular victory. It was only as she saw how happy Kaoru and the others were at this victory that Megumi began to think about the concept of friendship. Kenshin sensed an incoming danger as he prepared to shoot Megumi, unaware of the frustrated gnome Bishimi lurking nearby. Despite his warning, Kenshin was too far away to stop Bishimi, and the others couldn't react fast enough to save Megumi from the attack. Just as the bullet was about to hit Megumi, Yahiko intervened and was struck instead. The bullet was poisonous, causing him to faint. Enraged, Kenshin attacked Bishimi, but Hanya intervened. Now, Kenshin is trapped, facing another powerful opponent, while Yahiko has 1 hour to live unless he can get medical help. Hanya had no intention of fighting, knowing his comrades were injured and unable to capture Megumi. He chose to leave with them, giving Kenshin some breathing room. Kenshin asked for an antidote for Yahiko in exchange for safe passage, but Hanya refused. Kenshin attacked and suffered a rare defeat. True to his word, Hanya left with his friends, promising they would meet again as long as Megumi was sheltered. Unfortunately, Kenshin had no real experience in detoxification, but he knew that the first step should be removing the poison from Yahiko's body. Just as Kaoru was about to do so using her mouth, as most people didn't know about its terrible effects back then, Megumi prevented her from doing so, taking charge of treating Yahiko instead. After identifying the boy's symptoms, Megumi recognized the poison in his body and began her work. She wrote a prescription for Kaoru, instructed Kenshin to boil water and prepare towels, and asked Sanosuke for as much ice as possible, emphasizing that detoxification is a race against time and they needed to hurry. Fortunately, everything was done just in time to save Yahiko's life. While Yahiko was relieved, the doctor disapproved of her compulsive behavior and didn't share Sanosuke's appreciation. He emphasized that they should thank the note's author, who provided a perfect list of ingredients and instructions essential for Yahiko's recovery, noting the writer's expertise in Dutch studies. During the Edo period, where the Tokugawa shogunate had supposedly put a strict isolationism law, had made an exception for the Dutch merchants specifically, which had evolved after this era to include the rest of the Western medical knowledge. Sanosuke thought the note was written by a poison expert, but the doctor clarified it was someone skilled in Western medicine. Kaoru then identified the author as a woman, leading the doctor to deduce it was Megumi Takane. Surprised, Kaoru and Sanosuke asked for more information, and the doctor agreed to share what he knew. Kenshin caught Megumi off guard as she tried to escape, and despite her attempts to change the topic, she confessed her intent to leave Tokyo, insisting the issue would resolve soon. Kenshin, recognizing her Aizu tone, pointed out his experience fighting samurais from that region during the Bakumatsu era. When he inquired about her background, Megumi reluctantly agreed to share. Megumi was born in the renowned Takane family, famous for their medical expertise and dedication to treating both nobility and commoners. Her father was a leading figure in the field. After relocating to Nagasaki to embrace Dutch medicine, the shogunate allowed their return to Aizu. However, their efforts were futile as the Boshin War escalated, leading to Aizu's downfall. After the imperialist victory in Aizu, the Aizu clan faced severe oppression. The Takane family went to war, leaving young Megumi behind. She moved to Tokyo 5 years later and worked as a doctor's assistant, which is how the doctor telling the story met her. Unfortunately, the doctor was murdered 2 years later, and Megumi has been missing ever since. It was only when the old man expressed how much he wanted to see Megumi that Kaoru and Sanosuke began to worry that she might have already fled the dojo. Fortunately for them, Kenshin was learning about Megumi's background from her in person, as she admitted that she had no good sense of judgment 5 years ago. As such, she and the doctor she used to work for got easily manipulated by Kanryu to work for him. By the time she realized that she's involved in a huge mess and tried to escape it, it was already too late, as her superior at work got killed by Kanryu's men, leaving her alone in this mess. Megumi considered herself a lost cause, unable to escape her pain. After hearing her story, Kenshin realized Kanryu wanted her for her opium refining skills. Despite this, he admired her awareness of her guilt and argued that she deserved forgiveness and freedom from her burden. Megumi was surprised by this leniency, having not seen it since the Boshin War. Still, Kenshin made it clear that her pursuers will not give up easily, and that they'll be coming after her once again. However, he assured her that he as well as his friends will stand by her side, with Kaoru and Sanosuke confirming that. Although Kaoru had to ruin the mood by threatening Megumi not to make a move on her beloved pacifist Badasai. Elsewhere, Ayashi received note of the crushing defeat of Bishimi and Hayatoko. Once he confirmed that Hanya is still capable of performing spying operations, he gave him the order to learn more about Kenshin within 3 days' time, until he fully recovers from his injuries. The next day, Kanryu was welcomed by an American sailor and a fellow entrepreneur to be introduced to a new product that made him ecstatic. But what could that be? Let's get to that question for later and take a brief look at Sanosuke, who couldn't shake yesterday's events off his head. Meanwhile, Kenshin, Kaoru, and Yahiko were all enjoying Megumi's ohagi, with Kenshin openly praising her skill in comparison to Kaoru's infamous, mud-like attempt. His comment caught the attention of a young girl with an intense look and a demeanor reminiscent of One Punch Man, sparking some frustration in Kaoru. Megumi, ever the tease, encouraged Kenshin to choose her over Kaoru, which only made Kaoru more annoyed, reminding Megumi this wasn't part of their agreement. Megumi, never one to hold back, took another jab at Kaoru's insecurities, making her unable to respond. However, Yahiko had his own take on the situation, summing Megumi up perfectly. He thought Kaoru might become a bit more graceful with Megumi around, but she hadn't changed a bit. Kenshin, on the other hand, noticed a brighter, more hopeful side to Kaoru since Megumi's arrival, a fact that frustrated Kaoru even more. Meanwhile, Sanosuke returned with the test results, confirming the substance was indeed the new opium plaguing the town. Kenshin, in an attempt to ease the mood, invited Sanosuke to breakfast, but he declined, clearly holding a grudge against Megumi. Kaoru grew upset, and though Megumi recognized her mistake, she struggled to find a way to make amends. Kenshin, as always, tried to calm the situation, reminding her that they all knew she was at fault, but learning about her past gave them some understanding, meaning she couldn't be blamed entirely. His advice was to leave Sanosuke alone for now and let time work its course. Later, as Megumi washed dishes, Sanosuke's harsh label of opium girl still lingered in her mind. Her thoughts were interrupted by a visitor, Hanya, the book lender, who asked if she was a new resident. After she denied it, he threatened to poison the dojo's well if she didn't come with him to Kanryu. With little choice, Megumi reluctantly agreed. At Kanryu's mansion, Megumi once again refused his demand to work for him, but Kanryu quickly turned to blackmail, warning that he would burn down the Kamiya dojo if she didn't cooperate. He reminded her that, as the opium girl, she had no place to run, giving her until midnight to decide. Meanwhile, Ayashi doubted Kenshin would make any moves, but Kanryu confidently assured him that Kenshin wouldn't interfere if he thought Megumi had left of her own will. However, Kenshin suspected Kanryu's involvement, finding Megumi's sudden departure suspicious, especially since she had no family left in Aizu. Ready to investigate, Kenshin rallied his friends to join him, but Sanosuke initially refused, seeing no reason to help the opium girl. Yahiko was outraged, but Kenshin sternly pointed out that Sanosuke's reaction wasn't like him. Sanosuke admitted he was grieving the loss of a close friend, a good-natured man, who, unlike him, had stayed true to a pure path. Kenshin, ever persuasive, began to convince Sanosuke that Megumi was genuinely trying to make amends, reminding him that his coldness toward her had only made it harder for her. As Kenshin left, Yahiko, eager to repay Megumi for saving his life, wanted to join him. Kaoru initially tried to stop him, but Yahiko's determination won out, and she realized just how much he had grown. Sanosuke then decided to tag along as well, suggesting Kaoru stay behind to prepare breakfast for 5. At the same time, Megumi had arrived at Kanryu's mansion and informed the guards of her presence. Kenshin's team wasted no time and headed there that night, encountering little resistance at the entrance. They decided to storm the mansion directly, taking down any guards in their path. Inside, Kanryu was eager to get Megumi back under his control, but she surprised him by attempting to kill him instead. Just as she was about to strike, her dagger vanished. Ayashi had intervened, giving Kanryu a chance to retaliate. Despite his skills, Ayashi's loyalty to Kanryu seemed questionable, as the mastermind hardly seemed worthy of the Oniwa Banshu's allegiance. Kanryu ordered his private army to extract the opium recipe from Megumi, but Ayashi informed him that his entire force was already engaged with the intruders outside. Realizing his mistake, Kanryu reassured himself that his army could still overpower them. However, Kenshin, Sanosuke, and Yahiko were cutting through his forces with ease, even fending off the gunmen without much effort. The trio's path to the mansion was now wide open. Realizing Kenshin was more dangerous than he had anticipated, Kanryu instructed Ayashi to avoid fighting him. But Ayashi, confident in his abilities, refused, seeing Kenshin as the perfect challenge for the Edo Oniwaban group. Confronting Kanryu, Kenshin gave him one final chance to release Megumi. Instead of backing down, Kanryu foolishly tried to recruit Kenshin to his private army, an offer that Kenshin rejected without hesitation. Kanryu, realizing Kenshin was serious, declared he'd release Megumi within an hour. Kenshin agreed but warned that he'd come for her himself if necessary. Kanryu, even though he became terrified at this show of force, remained stubborn. Even Ayashi's warnings couldn't dissuade him from trying to force Megumi's cooperation. Ayashi assured his employer that the Oniwa Banshu had been deployed, declaring he wouldn't allow anyone, whether a pacifist swordsman like Kenshin or a corrupt businessman like Kanryu, to tarnish the group's name. Ayashi locked Megumi in the observatory on the mansion's 3rd floor, informing her of the current situation. He returned her dagger but made it clear he didn't care about opium or money. The Oniwa Banshu valued the fight above all. His choice to serve someone as corrupt as Kanryu seemed puzzling. If Ayashi craved combat, there were countless other paths he could have taken. Instead, he aligned himself with this sordid operation, leaving one to wonder about his true motivations. As the 1-hour deadline approached, Kenshin rushed into the mansion, only to encounter Hanya waiting for him. A fierce battle was imminent. How would Kenshin fare against this relentless adversary? Realizing how powerful his opponent is, Kenshin tried to solve the issue peacefully. Hanya, however, didn't change his mind, believing that Ayashi's words are absolute. Left with no other option, Kenshin prepared for battle. The fight began with Hanya taking the initiative, as he began by extending his arms to gain range against his opponent, going as far as to hit Kenshin in unexpected places, such as the back of his head. Don't get any funny ideas, this is a serious matter. Thankfully, Kenshin managed to dodge the most lethal attacks of the bunch. Hanya was proving himself not only as a powerful opponent, but a cunning one at that, so now Kenshin must take a different approach to deal with him. Taking pride in pinning Kenshin's back against the wall, Hanya couldn't help but make fun of Kenshin's strength, as he won't be able to last for a minute against Ayashi if he can't get past him first. Hearing that he got caught in his spell, Kenshin figured that he must break through it in order to win. No Sherlock. In order to do so, Kenshin took a different stance than usual. This took friend and foe there by surprise. Hanya knew that Kenshin knew the purpose of his stance, and yet he had the guts to claim that he had nothing that would qualify him to fight Ayashi, as he was confident that he can still defeat him himself anyway. Little did he know that Kenshin was using this stance to see through the actual lengths of his arms, as they were in horizontal striped tattoos. This has initially prevented Kenshin from determining the range of Hanya's arms, but now using this he could do it rather easily, so much so that he got to hit Hanya's head. Kenshin also pointed out that Hanya has been using that mask to hide his gaze and expression, which he was mostly right on that, as Hanya was using that mask to not get bullied further by girls after every time he confesses to a one, as his mask broke off, that is. Yahiko and Sanosuke, serving as the Orihime now Bleach character role in this fight. Kenshin, even though he didn't show much emotions, couldn't help but wonder if this was Hanya's own doing. Hanya responded that he's a spy, and as part of gathering intelligence, which is his main mission, he burned every facial features he has, just so he could disguise himself. He then proceeded to talk about his horrible childhood and the harsh environment he grew up in, and that he's thankful for Ayashi for saving him from his predicament, so much so that he's willing to kill for Ayashi's sake. And with that, he began to attack Kenshin like a behemoth. Kenshin, on the other hand, asked Hanya if he knew about Megumi's background, as part of his duties, that is, to which Hanya confirmed it, as he pressed his attacks further, so much so that he got his claws stuck against Kenshin's Sakabato. Anki freed himself. He managed to get enough distance to attack with renewed vigor, and so did Kenshin. This clash proved decisive. Kenshin had won, although with just a scratch. Still worried about Megumi, Kenshin decided to hurry up and go forward. For Megumi, things were not going well, as she was sitting in the middle of the observatory with her dagger in hand. As she was lost in thoughts, she saw that someone was trying to enter the room. It turned out that it was Kanryu, who was trying to get her to give him the opium refinement process. Megumi, disgusted by Kanryu's behavior, refused even his offers of helping her escape. Kanryu was furious at this, so much that the best he could do was swear at Megumi, while the latter was still thinking of what to do next. Especially that she had done that option before. Back to Kenshin, he moved on with the boys to the next floor, only to be welcomed by an iron chain ball being thrown at them. Fortunately for them, they managed to dodge it. Realizing that they did get here, this new opponent Shijiko concluded that they must have been strong enough to defeat Hanya. But will Shijiko do any better? That's something that he'll figure out, as Sanosuke caught the iron ball before it could get to Kenshin and Yahiko. Sanosuke decided to capitalize on this opportunity and asked Kenshin and Yahiko to move to the next floor, to which they agreed. Sanosuke was no fool, as he figured that Shijiko intended to not get in Kenshin's way. Shijiko thought that it'd be best to leave the best part for Ayashi to take care of. He also knew about Sanosuke's background as Zanza, much to the latter's surprise. Still, Sanosuke remained confident that he can still beat Shijiko without resorting to using a Zanbato. For his part, Shijiko found that underlings fighting for their bosses was an amusing idea, so he decided to fight without resorting to using any weapons. As Sanosuke charged forward, Shijiko resorted to using his chain instead, catching Sanosuke's right hand in the process. This took Sanosuke off guard, as Shijiko began to attack him with everything he got, while controlling his opponent's very movements and positioning. This is very bad for Sanosuke, especially that he was still laying down after the beatdown he just received. However, before Shijiko could get to turn his back to join Ayashi, Sanosuke stood up, defying his opponent's expectations. He was still enraged that Shijiko didn't stand true to fighting with nothing except for his sleeves, so much so that he broke the iron chain with his bare hands, much to Shijiko's surprise. This excitement got both sides to engage in melee, which Shijiko still managed to overpower Sanosuke once again. Despite the terrible damage he assumed he gave to Sanosuke's head after headbutting him, Shijiko realized that Sanosuke managed to leave him with a shaking arm. Impressed by that, he suggested that but Sanosuke cut ties with Kenshin and joined the Oniwabanshu instead. Shijiko made it clear that the organization doesn't care much about other people's backgrounds, as he for instance was an imperialist from Satsuma who got tasked to investigate the Edo Oniwaban, before being defeated by the then 13 years old Ayashi. Realizing how strong of an opponent he was, Ayashi decided to recruit Shijiko. Sanosuke, however, wasn't buying it, arguing that they're just strong and that's that while Yahiko, Kyoru and himself all admire Kenshin, which is why they fight around him and not for him, unlike the Oniwabanshu. To determine how true his words are, Sanosuke blocked Shijiko's fists. As he argued that Kenshin and the Oniwabanshu are completely different entities, Shijiko became so outraged that he began to headbutt Sanosuke with all of his might. And yet Sanosuke held his ground before crushing Shijiko's fists entirely and finish off his opponent with one punch to his head. For the damage he got, Sanosuke won the duel. As Sanosuke's fight was going through an upheaval, Kenshin was trying to solve the issue with Ayashi without resorting to fighting. Ayashi, however, was determined that Kenshin shall not pass no matter what. Left with no other option, Kenshin prepared himself for the fight. Seeing that Ayashi was wielding a kodachi, Kenshin found that he's fighting at a disadvantageous position, especially that he's using a sword that is as long as the katana. With that out of the way, Ayashi began his attack in earnest. Ayashi's initial attack was so fast that Kenshin barely managed to pull his sword in time to fend it off, and yet Ayashi was able to kick Kenshin away. For his part, Kenshin realized that Ayashi will be a tough nut to crack, especially with his impenetrable defense and an insanely fast defense that Kenshin couldn't even react to. As their conversation dragged on, Kenshin figured that his opponent was fighting to avenge the already fallen Tokugawa shogunate. His assumption was accurate, as Ayashi couldn't help but confess his disgust to Tokugawa Yashinabu's act in the very first battle of the Boshin War, as he abandoned 10,000s of his soldiers in order to get back to Edo, just to relinquish all of his powers to the imperialists. With the disappearance of the shogunate out of the picture, Ayashi expressed his only regret being that the Oniwabanshu's disappearance didn't come with a fight. He also claimed that if it wasn't for the surrender of Tokugawa Yashinabu, the shogunate forces backed up by the Oniwabanshu would have definitely won the civil war. For Kenshin, however, things were not as black and white as they seemed for Ayashi, as many people have thrown themselves into the fray on both sides, committing horrendous atrocities in the name of the causes they have joined. But that didn't mean that there are not those that have been genuinely concerned over the safety of this country, as they did risk their lives for the peace and happiness of the people. Kenshin concluded that Ayashi is nothing more than a bloody ice-cold competitive criminal by now, who wouldn't hesitate to raise the entirety of Tokyo to the ground if need came to be. With no signs of agreements coming in sight, Kenshin and Ayashi resumed their fight in earnest. Kenshin, however, couldn't get different results than what he expected. Seeing this, Yahiko got the cold shoulder, so much so that he couldn't even move his legs to help Kenshin in any meaningful way. However, his presence there was an encouragement for Kenshin as he began to think of a way to break through Ayashi's kodachi. Meanwhile, Kanryu was frustrated at how his hired hands, namely Ayashi and Megumi, were looking down on him, swearing to get rid of them as their boss. But let's get back to what's more important now, as Kenshin was actually true to his words. Instead of holding his sakabato from its handle, he decided to hold it from the blade itself, just so he could fight in much closer reach to Ayashi. Impressed by the essence of a Hitakiri Badasai, Ayashi decided to show his very own essence as the leader of the Oniwabanshu. Kenshin now found himself stuck, fighting the ghosts of Ayashi. Unable to figure out which one is the right one, Kenshin began to attack left and right, as if he was trying to catch the clouds with his bare hands. The only natural result for this was that Ayashi could now strike a lethal blow against Kenshin. The sight of Kenshin laying on the ground after such a strike enraged Yahiko, so much so that he sat in a stance to fight. However, much to his and Ayashi's surprise, Kenshin wasn't dead, as the injuries he received were not life-threatening. In fact, it was his long metal sheath that took the brunt of the attack, so much so that it got cut to pieces. Impressed by Kenshin's tenacity, Ayashi used the same technique against him once again. This time, Kenshin was able to see through Ayashi's attacks, ending up stopping the last of which with his bare hands. Unable to use his kodachi, Ayashi ended up taking several powerful hits from Kenshin, knocking him down instantly. Or so he thought, as Ayashi managed to stand back once again and punch Kenshin back, before falling down himself. This marked the end of the fight, with Kenshin as the victor. Still, Ayashi couldn't understand yet why Kenshin didn't finish him off. It was then that Kenshin began to talk more about his own philosophy, and how someone of Ayashi's caliber should know who has won the fight. Think of it like a strong punch in the face to give him a reality check. However, Kenshin thought that there's more than just wanting to fight as the reason why he's working for someone as scummy as Kanryu. Ayashi responded that for the record he did get offers from the imperialists to work for them in the intelligence sector, and yet he refused, as these offers were for him and not for the rest of his team. It's all for the homies after all. But all things considered, Kenshin respected Ayashi for his refusal to not perform an ugly betrayal like that of the shogun. Despite all that, Kenshin refused to give him the final blow. As this conversation was taking place, Kanryu arrived, revealing his secret weapon weapon that will get rid of everyone that looked down on him, the Gatling gun. This terrifying weapon that came from the land of the free after being used in the American Civil War, albeit it didn't contribute to the Union forces against the Confederacy. It was also used by the imperialists during the Boshin War, which contributed a lot to their decisive victory against the shogunate forces. Before anyone in the room could react, Kanryu began shooting with it. The shooting sounds echoed across the mansion, so much so that Sanosuke was awakened by it. As he tried to reach out to the next floor, he was surprised to see Hanya advising him to not be alarmed, as he promised that Ayashi would never play any dirty tricks against Kenshin. For his part, Hanya was also concerned at the safety of Ayashi, so he decided to take Shijiko with him and head there. Elsewhere, Hayatoko and Bishimi were also beginning to feel uneasy about Ayashi, so they decided to follow suit. In fact, everyone was right to feel concerned, as Kanryu was shooting at Ayashi, Kenshin, and Yahiko like there's no tomorrow, until he managed to shoot Ayashi in both his legs. As he took a break, Kanryu began to brag about his ambition to become the biggest arms dealer in the world. His first step to that end was by securing funds using refined opium, which is why he's not planning on showing mercy to anyone looking down on him. While not even Kenshin's disgust at Kanryu's will to sacrifice the lives of many people to make a fortune, nor at his insane comparison of his journey to make a fortune and Kenshin's to become the strongest could persuade him from attempting to shoot at the now helpless Ayashi. As Kanryu smugly rambled on about how wealth allowed a nobody like him to gain unprecedented power, Sanosuke arrived, bringing Ayashi's comrades along. The group was horrified to see their friends trapped in such a harrowing predicament. Without hesitation, they charged in to rescue them. Kanryu, now overwhelmed by confusion, fired his Gatling gun wildly, hitting anything in his chaotic path. Tragically, one of Kanryu's shots riddled Shikijo with bullets, leaving Ayashi to watch in horror. In his final moments, Shikijo remained at peace, expressing his gratitude to Ayashi for saving his life. Amid this devastating scene, Kanryu re-emerged like the fiend he was, boastfully proclaiming his invincibility with the power of his Gatling gun. In a desperate attempt to protect Ayashi, Hayatoko rushed forward, hoping to save his leader. Kanryu tried to gun him down as well, but the risk of the oil bag Hayatoko carried exploding threatened everyone nearby, including Kanryu himself. When Hayatoko drew closer, Kanryu focused on his head, shredding it with bullets. Before passing away, Hayatoko had Bishimi hidden in his barrel, intending for him to surprise Kanryu with a poisonous bullet. However, the overwhelming fire rate of the Gatling gun overpowered Bishimi, altering the bullet's trajectory and taking him down as well. After a brief lull, Hanya calculated that Kenshin would need approximately 10 seconds to retrieve his Sakabato, and he decided to buy him that time. Pointing out Megumi's location, Hanya told Kenshin his plan, leaving Kenshin no choice but to trust his comrades' resolve and move forward. In these final seconds, Hanya reflected on the days he trained with Ayashi and his now fallen comrades, reminiscing about their support and loyalty, which brought a smile to his face. Just as Kenshin retrieved his Sakabato, Kanryu, thrilled with his weapon's performance, aimed it at Kenshin, only to realize he had run out of ammo. Now defenseless, Kanryu faced the consequences of his actions. Although the logical response would have been to eliminate him, Kenshin stayed true to his vow of non-lethality and delivered a solid punch to Kanryu's face, leaving him incapacitated. Kenshin reassured Ayashi that the Onuwabanshu's sacrifice had not been in vain. However, he could offer little comfort to the grief-stricken Ayashi and opted to leave him alone for the moment, turning his attention to rescuing Megumi. As they prepared to leave, Sanosuke took a moment to reflect on Ayashi's strength, realizing that despite Ayashi's formidable power, his emotional wounds ran deeper than Kenshin's. Meanwhile, Megumi anxiously awaited news, gripping her dagger tightly as footsteps approached. Her fears vanished when Kenshin and the others entered to rescue her. Overcome with guilt, Megumi began apologizing for dragging them into her troubles and insisted she must atone by taking drastic measures. Before she could act on her guilt, Sanosuke arrived just in time to stop her, furiously reminding her that throwing away Kenshin's efforts would be a waste of everything they had done to help her. Amid the commotion, Yahiko noticed that the police had arrived, prompting the group to make a quick escape. Megumi, however, was reluctant to flee, feeling that turning herself in would be the best way to begin her penance. As the police surveyed the scene, Chief Uramura was shocked to discover Kanryu had smuggled a Gatling gun right under their noses, despite their surveillance efforts. Before Megumi could fully confess, Kenshin stepped in, emphasizing her role as a compassionate, talented doctor whom Kanryu had exploited to manufacture opium. Kenshin's intervention, supported by Yahiko and Sanosuke's testimonies, convinced Uramura to release Megumi. Kanryu tried to protest, but he fell silent under Kenshin's intimidating gaze. Megumi, touched by Kenshin's support and learning of his past as the feared Hidakiri Badasai, began to understand his philosophy of redemption. She resolved to embrace her path as a doctor, hoping to make amends for her past by healing others. Before they left the mansion, Kenshin asked Uramura about Ayashi's whereabouts. Uramura replied that he hadn't encountered Ayashi, only finding Kanryu with 4 beheaded bodies in the ballroom. room. The possibility of Ayashi escaping was unlikely, given that all exits had been sealed upon the police's arrival. Yet a later investigation revealed the exit of an underground tunnel had been left open. The police soon discovered Ayashi on the outer wall, holding the heads of his fallen comrades. Despite orders to capture him, Ayashi managed to elude them. Kenshin, still hoping for a chance to face Ayashi in a duel, wanted to fulfill Ayashi's desire for strength and closure for his comrades. Ayashi, however, declined for now but warned Kenshin that their paths would cross again, at which point he intended to defeat him. With this resolve for the moment, Kenshin and his friends returned home. Upon their arrival, Kaoru welcomed them, her bandaged fingers a testament to her dedication in preparing a special breakfast. While Yahiko and Sanosuke initially begged to rest before eating, Kaoru insisted, leaving them no choice but to join in the meal. Megumi, eager to share in this simple comfort, joined them as well, despite her admittedly awful cooking skills. The next day, Megumi prepared to depart from the dojo, accompanied by the doctor who had treated Yahiko. Before leaving, she expressed her gratitude to Kaoru for her hospitality, managing to tease Kaoru one last time before saying goodbye. Kenshin, relieved that the ordeal had finally ended, contemplated his inevitable confrontation with Ayashi while reflecting on Shikijo's words about Sanosuke's untapped potential. Kenshin resolved to honor this by continuing to watch over his friend. With the chapter concluded, life at the Kamiya Dojo settled back into a semblance of normalcy. Elsewhere, in the solitude of the mountains, Ayashi laid his fallen comrades to rest. Standing over their graves, he vowed to visit them with flowers once he had fulfilled his promise to defeat Kenshin. He then disappeared into the forest, a lone warrior carrying the memory of his comrades. It's a new day, where Yahiko began his day with intense training, reflecting on his recent experiences and pushing himself to improve. His friends at the dojo, Kaoru, Sanosuke, and Kenshin, notice his absence, each speculating on where he might be. Kaoru imagines he's out buying snacks, while Sanosuke jokes he's met a girl. Kenshin, however, believes Yahiko is training independently, seeking to refine his swordsmanship. Their curiosity grows, and when Yahiko appears, his cryptic responses leave them none the wiser. A few days later, the trio decides to follow Yahiko as he sneaks out. They trail him to the Akabiko restaurant, where they expect to catch him either eating or meeting someone. Instead, they're surprised to learn he's working there, a revelation that puzzles them. T, a waitress, informs them that Yahiko has been diligent, even taking on extra shifts. Sanosuke suspects Yahiko may be interested in a new recruit at the restaurant, but T clarifies that the girl arrived after Yahiko started working. Yahiko seems annoyed by the girl's apologetic nature, urging her to be more assertive. This surprises the trio, who now have more questions about his motives. As they're trying to figure things out, a tense situation unfolds. A group of thugs enters the restaurant, harassing the young girl and demanding her cooperation in a robbery scheme. It's revealed that they are pressuring her to steal keys to the restaurant owner's house. The girl, who belongs to a family loyal to a clan that lost power under the new government, tries to dissuade them, but her pleas fall on deaf ears. The gang leader, Mikio, dismisses her objections and insists, even threatening the restaurant staff if she doesn't comply. Meanwhile, Yahiko, who has taken a break from his work, spots the girl being dragged away by the thugs. Despite his own exhaustion, Yahiko's sense of justice compels him to follow them. He witnesses Mikio berating the girl and forcing her to give up the keys. Disgusted by the gang's behavior, Yahiko intervenes, bravely confronting them. He manages to defeat two of the gang members before Mikio retaliates, injuring Yahiko. As Yahiko struggles against the group, Kenshin observes from a distance, assessing his young protege's resolve. Although Kaoru and Sanosuke want to help, Kenshin stops them, believing Yahiko needs to learn how to handle these challenges independently. Though the gang takes the keys and retreats, Yahiko promises the girl, Tsubame, that he'll protect her and the restaurant from any further harm. Tsubame, moved by his courage, apologizes for involving him in her troubles. Yahiko brushes off her concerns, motivated to prove himself worthy of carrying a sword and becoming stronger. Back at the dojo, he devises a new training method to improve his combat skills against multiple enemies. Kaoru advises him to use his reflexes rather than rely on wooden training dummies, encouraging him to refine his instincts. Seeking additional guidance, Yahiko turns to Kenshin, who advises him to lure multiple opponents into a narrow area to take them down one by one. Inspired, Yahiko practices this strategy, vowing to become fast enough to evade his enemies while protecting others. Kaoru, sensing his growing maturity, reminds him that he carries the weight of responsibility as a Kamiya Kashin disciple, inspiring him to train even harder. That night, Mikio and his gang break into the restaurant, confident in their success. However, Yahiko, who had anticipated their plan, intercepts them and steals the backup keys from Mikio, drawing the gang into a secluded alley. There, he puts his training to the test, bravely fighting the men using Kenshin's tactic. Yahiko manages to fend off several attackers, but Mikio, sensing an advantage, realizes Yahiko is now cornered and tries to overwhelm him. Just as Mikio orders his men to attack again, they notice Kenshin and Sanosuke standing above them on a nearby rooftop. The gang members, terrified of Kenshin's reputation as the legendary Hitakiri Batasai, flee the scene. Yahiko takes advantage of the chaos to focus on Mikio, evading his attacks and ultimately overpowering him by stepping on his sword and delivering a decisive blow. His victory marks a significant milestone, proving to himself and his friends that he has grown stronger. After the fight, Tsubeim expresses her gratitude, while Kaoru, who had also been observing, reassures her that Yahiko's strength is genuine. Yahiko is grateful for his friend's support but remains determined to handle future challenges independently. Back at the dojo, Sanosuke finally asks Yahiko why he took on the restaurant job. Rather than a trivial reason, Yahiko admits he wanted to save up for his own sakabato, a reverse blade sword similar to Kenshin's. The admission surprises and amuses his friends, especially Kaoru, who overhears the conversation and can't resist teasing him. In the end, it was Kenshin that confronted the boy with a smile on his face, telling him that a sakabato is a little too pricey to get, shattering his hopes and dreams in an instant.
Yahiko, するでござるよ。するのか。するでござる。するのか。
It's a new day and a new beginning, with Yahiko's day starts with frustration as he waits for Kaoru, who's running late. Eventually, he heads to her room only to find her still adjusting her clothes. Kenshin, noticing the chaos, jokingly comments on Kaoru's relentless nature. Kaoru then explains that she plans to visit the Mikawa dojo for training with Kenshin since the dojo's master has long wanted to meet him. Despite some hesitation, Kenshin agrees. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the forest, a young boy informs an older man about the location of the Mikawa dojo, revealing ominous intent. Upon arriving, Kaoru, Yahiko, and Kenshin are warmly greeted by the dojo's members and its master, Mikawa, who has a tense moment with Kenshin. However, any tension is quickly dispelled, as Mikawa reassures them that his days of challenging others are behind him. His focus is now on training the next generation, though he laments the decline in swordsmanship since the end of the Edo period. Kenshin tries to lift Mikawa's spirits, emphasizing the importance of Kaoru's dedication to teaching Yahiko. Suddenly, a large, intimidating man named Reijuda Isurugi bursts in, challenging Mikawa to a duel. The dojo's disciples try to dissuade him, but Mikawa accepts, despite Kenshin's concerns. Reijuda insists on fighting with real swords, which Mikawa refuses, opting instead for bamboo. As the duel unfolds, Reijuda's strength is evident. He scores a brutal hit on Mikawa's shoulder, shocking everyone. Yahiko initially believes Reijuda missed his first blow, but Reijuda's young follower, Yutaro, corrects him, explaining that Reijuda's technique is more advanced. As Mikawa struggles with a fractured shoulder, Reijuda gains the upper hand in the second round, leaving Mikawa nearly defeated. Sensing real danger, Kenshin steps in, uncovering Reijuda's ruthless intentions. Reijuda rants about restoring the true strength of the sword, criticizing bamboo practice swords as tarnishing the legacy of the blade. He declares that those who use bamboo swords are unworthy of wielding real weapons, a view that shocks Kenshin. Undeterred, Reijuda invites Kenshin to fight. When Kenshin hesitates, Reijuda orders Yutaro to set the dojo on fire, feeling entitled after winning his duel. Kenshin finally accepts Reijuda's challenge. Despite the fight's intensity, Kenshin masterfully holds his own, countering Reijuda's techniques. Realizing Kenshin's skills, Reijuda backs down, acknowledging Kenshin's strength and vowing to meet him again someday. Yutaro and Yahiko exchange a few more heated words before Yutaro reluctantly follows his master away. Later, an invitation arrives for Kenshin, sent by Reijuda's wealthy benefactor, Uziman Tsukeyama, who reveals that Reijuda had saved him from bandits, earning his trust. Kenshin and his friends are curious and decide to go. At Tsukeyama's mansion, Yahiko realizes the benefactor is Yutaro's father, adding tension. Yutaro insults Kenshin and the others, but Kenshin remains focused on the meeting with Reijuda. During a walk with Tsukeyama, Kenshin learns that Tsukeyama's family made their fortune by exporting katana swords to Europe. Reijuda rescued Tsukeyama during a previous attack, which only fueled Reijuda's vision of restoring Japan's old ways. Once they arrive at a secluded bridge, Reijuda makes his true intentions known. He plans to eliminate over 500 different sword styles to revive the ancient way of the sword. Reijuda believes this ruthless approach is necessary, inviting Kenshin to join his crusade. Kaoru, secretly observing with Yahiko and Sanosuke, realizes that her Kamiya Kashin style could be in jeopardy if Reijuda succeeds. Kenshin firmly rejects Reijuda's offer, refusing to support a vision that would harm innocent people. Frustrated, Reijuda draws his sword, declaring Kenshin an enemy. With tensions at a peak, it's clear that the confrontation between Reijuda and Kenshin has only just begun. As he did, Isurugi attacked Kenshin instantly. This time, Isurugi had no will to hold himself, so he kept on attacking with all his might over and over until the opportunity presented itself for Kenshin to draw his sakabato and destroy Isurugi's katana. Once again, Isurugi bailed out of the fight as abruptly as he started it, much to the trio's surprise. Just as they were about to leave the mansion, they remembered something trivial. They forgot to untie Yutaro, who was so outraged at these guests treating him that way. The more he bragged about retaliating for what they did, Yahiko pointed out that he should put his energy to good use, instead instead of yapping and following that behemoth of a man like some kind of a pathetic sidekick. Yahiko also made it clear that he'll take his challenge anytime if he ever comes to the dojo, as long as he's willing to duel using bamboo swords. With that, Kenshin and his goons pieced out to Kaoru's dojo, leaving a frustrated Yutaro behind. That same night, Yutaro came to the dojo to fight Yahiko as promised. Despite Yahiko being true to his word, he was confused about what in God's name this brat is doing while they were sleeping, to which Yutaro pointed out that Yahiko never specified a time. This was a good reason, but come on bro, that's absurdly funny. Still, Yahiko relented, heading over to the dojo to duel his nemesis. Of course, he got Kaoru to wake up, they got a city to burn after all. Just kidding, he just wanted her to be the referee of this match. A match that wouldn't even begin as Yahiko, Kaoru and Kenshin remarked that Yutaro have never held a sword before, despite his desperate attempts to convince them that he only held actual katanas. Yahiko and Kenshin, however, tried to get to the heart of the matter with him, where they learned that Isurugi had never been willing to teach him how to hold a sword, even though Yutaro tried to make excuses for him. Not wanting to let Yutaro leave empty-handed, Kaoru decided to teach the kid some of the basics of the night. Despite Yahiko's jeering of his nemesis, Yutaro kept on training until sunrise. The more effort he put into it, the more Kaoru praised him for that. Yutaro has seen great hospitality from his hosts in this dojo, which was for a person that has never wielded a sword in his life an ecstatic feeling, albeit his prideful nature took the better of him, making him refuse to admit how fun learning swordsmanship using bamboo swords is. For Yutaro, becoming an invincible swordsman like Isurugi is a mean that he should get, in order to put his father to shame. After all, he ditched the pride of being a samurai to become a merchant, a sword merchant that is. As such, he grew resentful of his father, so much that he wanted to show him how a true samurai lives with nothing but his sword. In the back of his head, Kenshin noticed that Yutaro isn't that different from Yahiko. They were incredibly similar when it comes to their prideful nature, except that this is coming from an opposite place for Yutaro. To ease the mood a little, Kaoru suggested to Yutaro that he keep on training with them for a while longer. She even pointed out that if he trains with Yahiko, he might even grow stronger than him eventually, much to Yahiko's annoyance. Later that day, Yutaro informed Isurugi that he's planning on training in the Kamiya dojo for a while. He was worried that he might get insulted, but Isurugi gave his assent, pointing out that it might be a good opportunity for him to learn more about Kenshin, using Yutaro that is. Yutaro was glad that he got his first recognition by his master. However, Isurugi had other plans in mind, and perhaps his slight grin gave the whole thing away for us. A few days later, Sanosuke couldn't help but express how impressed he is about Yutaro's passionate for training, and how he began to open up for Yahiko too. This was something that Kenshin should have never mentioned, because as he entered the dojo, he found the two nemesis arguing about who's the most serious about his training and all. It was then that Yutaro, in an impressive feat of clumsiness, admitted that he's here only to scout on Kenshin for Isurugi's upcoming fight with him. Still, the argument kept on going, much to Kenshin's confusion. It only took Kaoru's arrival to put an end to this argument, where she asked Yahiko to wear his mask to be the target for Yutaro's face targeting exercise. Despite initial refusal, Kaoru convinced him to do so. Much to everyone's surprise, Yutaro proved to be a fast-learning student. Kenshin in particular began to think that Yutaro may have much greater potential as a swordsman than he thought. Yutaro pressed his attack to the point that Yahiko became frustrated at his inability to repel incoming attacks. That evening, Yutaro was incredibly happy that he enjoyed himself in Akabiko restaurant. As for how he enjoyed himself, it's by calling Yahiko out in the restaurant as server, much to the latter's annoyance. Kaoru, despite being also annoyed by this display of stupidity of her two disciples, she opted to not get herself involved. Apparently, she just lost hope for them, even though Kenshin tried to get her to stop this fight. Thankfully, Tsubame's arrival made her smile after this embarrassment. The former's mistake was that she assumed that they're getting along, which naturally got Yahiko to lash out at her for not being able to tell the most obvious of things. It was then that Kaoru had to step in to stop Yahiko from scaring Tsubame. To add insult to injury, Yutaro began approaching her, joining Kaoru in pressing on Yahiko's buttons. Now that things have calmed down, Kaoru suggested to Yutaro to join her dojo as an official student. After all, he has proven to be a talented student, and she assured him that he would go pretty far with her teachings. For his part, Yutaro was appreciative of Kaoru's kindness, praising her for being an amazing instructor while not resisting to make a thrust against Sanosuke for being Sanosuke. However, he rejected her offer as he still believed that he should remain loyal to Isurugi. As they walked in the woods that night, Yutaro spoke to the team about his first encounter with Isurugi right in front of the Jizo statue. It was there that Uziman's convoy got attacked by bandits. In desperation, Uziman begged them to spare his life in exchange for as much money that they wanted, unlike Yutaro, who found his father's behavior to be pathetic, just as the bandits thought. For all his prideful nature, Yutaro is just a boy. and there's nothing much he could do to save his and his father's life. As the bandits kept on further humiliating Uzuman, Isurugi came out of nowhere to save the day. That ignited a fire in Utaro's soul to learn more about the way of the soul, following Isurugi as his mentor. Despite how much of a heroic person Isurugi seemed to be in that moment, Sanosuke wasn't able to swallow it, as it sounded like nothing but a huge lie for him, much to Utaro's annoyance. For now, nothing will ever change Utaro's opinion over Isurugi. He couldn't help but ask Kenshin to make sure he fights Isurugi fair and square if the fighting between them came into being. For his part, Kenshin is a man of his word, much to the boy's relief. Before he could say anything else, however, Isurugi ambushed the group out of nowhere. It turned out that Sanosuke's guess was correct, and yet Yutaro insisted on making excuses for Isurugi, but by now, Isurugi crossed the Rubicon, and there's no turning back. He began by challenging Kenshin in earnest, using every dirty trick in the book to turn the tide against him, except that nothing worked. Realizing that he has no chance of defeating Kenshin, Isurugi decided to unleash his ultimate technique, which Kenshin managed to narrowly dodge. However, Yutaro wasn't as lucky, as he ended up being badly injured. As Kenshin and the others stood in horror over the boy, Isurugi didn't care much, as he didn't hit any of Yutaro's vitals. Fueled by rage, Yahiko complained that that's his disciple that got injured. To which Isurugi didn't just deny that he never considered him as such, but confessed that he allowed him to tag along after staging that robbery a few months back, confirming once and for all that Sanosuke's prediction was accurate. As he asked Kenshin to get ready to continue the duel, the latter with a terrifying gaze told Isurugi that getting Yutaro to a doctor is his main priority right now, and once they meet again, he'll bring all of his might upon him. Thankfully, they managed to get the boy to Megumi just in time to save his life. However, the injury made him unable to hold a sword for the rest of his life, thus ending his dream of becoming a great swordsman before it even began. Kaoru and Yahiko were unconsoled at the gravity of this news. Yahiko in particular, despite him not liking Yutaro's guts, admitted that he was a talented disciple, and that he could have made it high. In desperation, he tried to get the doctor to think of other ways to help Yutaro's arm to recover, but it's too late now, as the doctor and Megumi tried their best. Amid their sadness, a sudden thud was heard from inside Yutaro's room, so they rushed outside to check on what's going on. It turned out that the patient had fallen off his bed. He wasn't hurt any further than he already was physically, but the shock of being betrayed by his mentor and the aftermath of his injury turned the ever-energetic Yutaro into a hollow shell of his former self. Hearing that Kenshin had already left, Yahiko and Kaoru decided to follow suit, promising to take Yutaro with them to see this score settled once and for all. For now, Isurugi began to notice that Kenshin is late, assuming that he ran for his life after bearing witness to his secret technique. This claim was quickly laughed off by Sanosuke, as Kenshin has no reason to run away from him. Isurugi got worked up that he threatened to slash Sanosuke, but his threat was as empty as his ego. Before he could get to fight our fighter for hire, Kenshin arrived at the scene. This time, Kenshin came in guns blazing, managing to dodge that secret technique that Isurugi possessed. In fact, Kenshin figured out the secret behind that technique, dodging it with ease as he came closer to that behemoth, shattering his confidence with every step closer he took, until he managed by a stroke of luck to merely scratch Kenshin. Isurugi was overjoyed when he noticed it, as he began to brag about how much time it took him to master this technique that managed so far to end the future of a kid in becoming a swordsman and merely scratch a vagabond. Kenshin had already mentioned that, concluding that Isurugi is an all-talk person that has never slain anyone before. After all, his shameless proud attitude of his clean sword isn't something that a manslayer would ever feel. Now it's time for Kenshin to demonstrate what the abyss of a manslayer actually seems like, which made Isurugi begin by pressing his ultimate technique against him once again, only for Kenshin to dodge it time and again. This didn't seem good for Sanosuke, as he figured out that the injury he received while defending Yutaro earlier had halved his strength, leaving him with no option but to keep on dodging Isurugi's attacks, until he got injured once again in his leg this time. This may seem to be bad, but Kenshin also had a trick up his sleeve. As the behemoth charged at him to finish him off, Kenshin was at a fair distance from him to throw his sakabato at his forehead. The hit took Isurugi by surprise that Kenshin capitalized on it and hit him twice more with all of his might, knocking this bombastic loser out of the picture. Or was he? As Kenshin sensed that Isurugi still had some strength left in him, Yahiko was trying to get to him. However, he got caught by Isurugi, who threatened to kill the young boy if Kenshin doesn't let go of his sword. This time, Yahiko asked him to do so if he's a man, while Sanosuke repeated that to him, as he noticed that Isurugi is getting desperate to secure a victory. Kenshin approached the loser, making it clear that Shinko style may be able to slash men, but can't kill them, as it never was a murderous sword to begin with. He also made it clear that he'll show him what a real murderous sword looks like if he doesn't let go of his. Realizing that he lost all hopes, and that he's standing before an actual manslayer, Isurugi let go of Yahiko, standing paralyzed in shame, horror and confusion as everyone left with Yutaro. The next day, Kaoru, Yahiko and Sanosuke were denied entry to enter the Tsukeyama Sukiyama mansion to check on Yutaro. Although it was a bummer, they were understanding, as the boy had gone through an ordeal by now. For Uziman, he explained to Kenshin that he was left with no other option but to get in the business of selling swords to make a living once the Meiji era began, as swordsmanship began in steep decline after the crushing defeat of the Satsuma Rebellion. He also admitted that while many swordsmen have lost every bit of relevance that they had before, he managed to secure the facade of a success, albeit his life is that of a loser in his own account. Still, Uziman did that in order to raise his family and protect what's dear to him, even though it ended up turning Yutaro against him. Before parting ways, Uziman informed Kenshin that this might be their last encounter, as he's considering to take Yutaro and move out to the German Empire, hoping that advanced medical science there would make Yutaro recover faster, and that he'll forget about swordsmanship for good there. Hearing this, Yahiko was deeply saddened. 1 week later, Kenshin and his friends went to bid their very likely last farewell for the Tsukayamas. Yutaro wasn't able to say a word for them, just as Kaoru, Sanosuke, and Kenshin couldn't think of anything that would make him smile after losing what's dear to him. Yahiko, however, seeing Yutaro walking further and further away from him, decided to take matters into his own hands, so he charged at Yutaro after screaming his name, to which Yutaro parried Yahiko's attack. It was thanks to Yahiko's reminder that he should grow into a much stronger person than Isurugi if he wants to get over his betrayal for him. This worked wonders on Yutaro as he began to retaliate against Yahiko with his cane, promising that he never plans on giving up on swordsmanship. That left everyone in shock, but relieved to see Yutaro lively again. As he got on the train, Kaoru and Yahiko made sure to remind him that the Kamiya dojo is always open for him if he ever got back to Japan. And with that, Yutaro have parted ways with them. Deep down, however, he took an oath that the first thing he'll ever do is to defeat Yahiko once he's back. For the Kamiya dojo members, Sanosuke and Yahiko went to have some Western cuisine, while Kaoru, who's supposed to be the one that will treat them to it, have stopped briefly to see that Kenshin have been thinking of how things would have been better for Isurugi if he ever questioned the essence of the sword, instead of focusing on techniques alone. With that topic out of the way, it seemed that this chapter in this story was over, with Kaoru having Yutaro's seat in her dojo reserved. There's only one problem though, was Isurugi really done by now? After his humiliating defeat, he was left so badly shaken that he began to swear that he's going to kill anyone that comes in his way. His first targets were a young girl and her grandmother praying in front of the Jizo statue. He remained reluctant as he was about to slash them, but when he acted, he ended up destroying the statue's head instead, before finally giving up and crying in front of it. On a tranquil day, Sanosuke found himself enjoying a meal with his friends at the Akabiko restaurant. Amidst their conversations, T mentioned the arrival of a new art shipment, which included a piece by a popular artist. She lamented that she couldn't leave work to retrieve the painting and asked Sanosuke if he could do her the favor. Initially, Sanosuke suggested she ask Yahiko instead, but that option was off the table since Yahiko was also busy working. With no other alternative, Sanosuke humorously proposed that he would get the painting in exchange for a free meal every day. T, however, refused, reminding him that he had already been eating at the restaurant's expense for quite some time. Curious about the painting T wanted, Sanosuke asked for more details. T revealed that it was swordsman Hakairo Iba by Tsunin Tsukioka. Sanosuke recognized the name, knowing it depicted a handsome swordsman from the Bakumatsu era. T was impressed by Sanosuke's knowledge, and Tsubame, though initially hesitant to ask for a favor, was also interested in the painting. Sanosuke decided to get 2 copies of the painting, one for T and the other for Tsubame. As Sanosuke left the restaurant, his friends couldn't help but express their pride in him. He was still the admirable person they had always known. With this new mission in mind, Sanosuke headed to the shop that carried the painting, where he ran into Kenshin and Kaoru. Kenshin joked that Sanosuke might be getting a painting of a beautiful lady or something less appropriate, but Sanosuke quickly explained the situation. He asked the shop owner for the paintings and was lucky to get the last 2 available copies. Unfortunately for Kaoru, she ended up paying for them as if she were Sanosuke's benefactor. Kenshin engaged the merchant in a discussion about the history of the Nishiki painting, which originated during the Edo period and featured actors and scenery. In the Meiji era, the subjects of these paintings expanded, reflecting the changes in society and spreading Meiji culture across the empire. While the merchant boasted about his collection, Sanosuke noticed a painting of Sozo. The merchant explained that it was made by Tsunin, a famous painter, who continued to draw it despite poor sales. Puzzled, Sanosuke wondered why Tsunin was so devoted to a painting of a traitor. Intrigued, Sanosuke decided to investigate further and asked the merchant about Tsunin Tsukioka's whereabouts. Upon arriving at Tsukioka's location, Sanosuke looked for him but found no immediate answers. He then called out Tsukioka by his true identity, Katsuhiro Tsukioka, a childhood friend and former associate member of the Sekiho army. Katsuhiro eventually opened the door, surprised to see Sanosuke. Sanosuke had identified him from their presence in Sozo's painting. Kenshin and Kaoru, observing from a distance, were relieved that Sanosuke wasn't getting into trouble and decided to head home. Sanosuke and Katsuhiro reminisced about their past. Sanosuke shared that he was now a vagabond, enjoying life in his own way. Katsuhiro, however, had been consumed by resentment since Sagara Sozo's execution. He harbored deep anger towards the Emperor and those who conspired against Sozo, tarnishing his legacy. Sanosuke bluntly pointed out that Katsuhiro probably hadn't made any new friends since their parting, which explained his gloominess. Katsuhiro believed that their reunion was a divine miracle, possibly orchestrated by Sozo. He revealed that he had finished preparations to restore the Sekiho army and sought Sanosuke's help in a crusade of revenge. Despite Sanosuke's attempts to dissuade him by citing the Satsuma rebellion's failure, Katsuhiro had a different plan. He intended to start his rebellion in Tokyo, targeting the Home Ministry to cripple the government's operations. Sanosuke was shocked to learn that Katsuhiro had been making bombs and planned to use them to destroy vital imperial buildings in Tokyo. Katsuhiro believed this would incite samurais and farmers across the empire to rebel. He expected Sanosuke to join him in this plot, as he was the only person Katsuhiro could trust. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Sanosuke knew he couldn't abandon his childhood friend, nor could he betray his new friends. He was aware that the Meiji regime, though weakened by the Satsuma rebellion, was still strong and wouldn't fall to a few bombs. Katsuhiro, driven by memories of Sozo, was blinded by his desire for revenge. Sanosuke decided to inform Kenshin and Kaoru at the Kamiya dojo about his discovery. He asked Kaoru if he could host a big party at the dojo to celebrate his reunion with Katsuhiro. Despite the strangeness of the request, Kaoru agreed, and Sanosuke assured her that he would handle the expenses. The evening of the party, everyone gathered at the dojo. Megumi felt awkward around Sanosuke's friend, but the atmosphere was lively. Sanosuke encouraged everyone to enjoy themselves, knowing that it might be the last time they could all be together like this. Sanosuke tried to get his friends to interact with Katsuhiro, who impressed them with his knowledge of Sanosuke's personality. T and Tsubame were flattered by personal sketches Tsunen had made of them. Kenshin initially refused to be drawn but eventually relented due to everyone's persistence. During their conversation, Katsuhiro became upset upon learning that Kenshin was an imperialist from Kyoto. Despite the tension, Katsuhiro handed over a drawing of Kenshin without facial features, claiming he couldn't see the man behind the smile and scar. Kenshin tried to brush it off with humor. As the party wound down and everyone fell asleep, Sanosuke informed Katsuhiro of his decision. He made it clear that the party wasn't a last supper but a genuine celebration. Katsuhiro, still fixated on his plans, believed it was a sign of their shared destiny. Sanosuke and Katsuhiro left the dojo together, with Sanosuke telling Kenshin that their next meeting might be on opposite sides. As Sanosuke left, Kenshin turned out to be awake as he understood the gravity of his friend's predicament. By now, Katsuhiro and Sanosuke arrived at the ministry building. As they stood before the imposing structure, the moment of truth had arrived. Realizing that the guards were inattentive, Katsuhiro began his assault, bombing the building's exterior. By the time the guards reacted, Katsuhiro and Sanosuke were already making their way inside. Sanosuke, agile and quick, managed to jump to the edge of the building's wall. As he did, he began to recall that Sozo admitted that he was forced to commit atrocities against the shogunate. Katsuhiro followed, only to be stunned by the sight of Kenshin waiting on the other side. It was then that Katsuhiro realized the full extent of Kenshin's significance. Unfazed, Katsuhiro descended and confronted Kenshin, asking if he had come to take Sanosuke back. Kenshin, however, was not concerned with Sanosuke's choices, as was there to prevent Katsuhiro from committing any violent acts. Frustrated and angered by the presence of yet another imperialist in his way, Katsuhiro began throwing bombs at Kenshin. Kenshin effortlessly sliced through the bombs, rendering the attacks futile. This only served to infuriate Katsuhiro more. He turned to launch another barrage at Kenshin, but Kenshin managed to dodge even the one bomb that exploded behind him, emerging unscathed from the explosion. Realizing the futility of further attacks, Sanosuke stepped in to stop Katsuhiro. He pointed out that they had already wasted too much time and that the police were likely closing in. They needed to retreat immediately. Katsuhiro, unable to accept the failure of his meticulously crafted plan, was unwilling to relent. It took a single punch from Sanosuke to bring him back to reality. Katsuhiro had lost, and there was no changing that. As Sanosuke carried his defeated friend on his shoulder, he noticed that Kenshin had diverted the earlier explosion to create an escape route for them. Before making their exit, Sanosuke asked Kenshin if he would strike him down if he continued to defend Katsuhiro. Kenshin affirmed that he would, as it would be insincere to fight half-heartedly. Relieved by Kenshin's honesty, Sanosuke left without further words. Katsuhiro awoke in his room, immediately searching for his bombs, only to find they were gone. Sanosuke informed him that Kenshin had disposed of them. Frustrated and feeling betrayed, Katsuhiro decided to take matters into his own hands. He planned to end his life in front of the ministry building, hoping his death would expose the government's wrongdoings and incite rebellion. Sanosuke, fed up with Katsuhiro's delusions, confronted him with the harsh reality that he was not the center of the world. Despite Sanosuke's efforts, Katsuhiro remained resolute and left, determined to carry out his plan. Desperately, Sanosuke tried to catch up to Katsuhiro, reflecting on Kenshin's respect for Katsuhiro's skills and the decision to leave this matter to him. On his way to the ministry building, Katsuhiro managed to evade 2 officers using a smoke bomb. Upon reaching the building, Sanosuke caught up with him, and they both tumbled towards the river's edge. It was there that Sanosuke clarified his stance, assuring Katsuhiro that he had never betrayed him and that Kenshin's interference was simply his way of doing things. Katsuhiro, dagger in hand, prepared for a confrontation. However, he wasn't beyond redemption. He dropped the dagger, confident in his ability to fight Sanosuke with his fists. The ensuing fight was short, but Katsuhiro wasn't willing to give up easily. He saw this battle as retribution for the 10 years he believed Sanosuke had wasted while their captain's name was disgraced. Sanosuke pointed out that there were other ways to honor Sagara Sozo's memory. Instead of isolating himself, Katsuhiro could see that people in town were building a new world with their hands. Kaoru was spreading swordsmanship in the Meiji era, Yahiko continued training despite being abandoned. Megumi was making amends by treating the sick, and Shu and Jinji remained hopeful despite their hardships. They all gathered for food and laughter, embodying the equality their captain had envisioned. Katsuhiro realized that his efforts had caused more harm than good, and he wasn't the center of the world. As they headed home, Katsuhiro worried that Kenshin might hand his bombs to the government. Sanosuke reassured him that Kenshin wouldn't do such a thing. Kenshin, dissatisfied with the current regime, had experienced its flaws firsthand and wouldn't support its atrocities. Sanosuke mentioned that their captain had admitted to committing terrible acts under duress, but Katsuhiro's belief that the end justifies the means was misguided. They couldn't resort to the level of corrupt officials if they wanted real change. Slow, steady progress was key, and Japan's history proved this to some extent. The most important goal for Sanosuke was creating a society where everyone could live happily. As they walked, a bomb detonated high in the sky by Kenshin brought a smile to Sanosuke's face. The next morning, Katsuhiro reminisced about the days with their captain, whose guidance had led him to victory against a young Sanosuke. Realizing he needed to forge his own path, Katsuhiro began drawing with renewed purpose. Sanosuke, unsure of Katsuhiro's fate since the incident, found it awkward to check on him. As he reflected on this, a painting merchant approached Sanosuke with a delivery from Katsuhiro. It was his final Nishiki painting, signaling his decision to start an illustrated newspaper to fight government tyranny. Though the news saddened the merchant, it brought a smile to Sanosuke. This new chapter began with Kenshin surrounded by his friends at the Kamiya dojo as they drank tea, which earned Kaoru praise from everyone except Yahiko, who mentioned that she only thought with her stomach, though he admitted he did get great food because of it. Despite her annoyance at Yahiko, Kaoru was surprised when Kenshin mentioned he couldn't remember the last time he had tea this tasty. Megumi brushed it off, suggesting he might have had good tea during his wanderings, but Kenshin denied it, revealing he hadn't been back home since he left. Sanosuke then asked if Kenshin could share a tale from his travels. Everyone was excited, prompting Kenshin to think of an unusual, fun story that included the defeat of a villain. During the Bakumatsu era, treaties of amity and commerce were signed in the Yokohama foreign settlement, leading to the opening of the Yokohama port. This settlement was designated for foreigners to stay and trade. A certain red-headed samurai with a cross-shaped scar, definitely not Kenshin, wandered the streets aimlessly until a carriage nearly ran him over. Fortunately, he dodged it at the last second. The carrier, introducing himself as Denkichi, apologized, and Kenshin introduced himself as Rorani. Denkichi noted Kenshin's illegal sword, but before Kenshin could explain, a woman called for Denkichi's help. A woman had fallen ill in the street, with her daughter crying beside her. People were desperate to get her to a doctor. Denkichi fetched his rickshaw, bragging about its quality. Before he could help, a mysterious figure emerged from the carriage, assuring everyone he wasn't suspicious. Kenshin found the spectacle amusing, but others were wary of the doctor's concealed face and foreign origins. Denkichi vouched for the doctor, citing the saying, "If you live in Edo for 3 generations, you're an Edo native. But if you live in Yokohama for 3 days, you're a Yokohama native." Despite skepticism, Denkichi remained confident in the doctor, who had lived in Yokohama long enough to be considered a native. Denkichi calmed the crying daughter while Dr. Elder examined the sick woman. He requested Denkichi take the patient to his hotel room to combine medicines. As Denkichi complied, he was confronted by Dain Ishizu, a renowned Japanese doctor from Yokohama who viewed Dr. Elder as a nuisance and competition. Ishizu, claiming Yokohama as his territory, threatened to unleash his watchdogs on the woman if Dr. Elder treated her. Kenshin intervened, prioritizing the woman's treatment. In the ensuing scuffle, Kenshin bought Denkichi enough time to take the woman and her daughter, following with Dr. Elder to flee the scene. On their way, Kenshin noted people's doubts about Dr. Elder's credibility and decided to run faster. Frustrated, Ishizu sent one of his men to follow them, planning further action. At the hotel, Dr. Elder ensured the patient stayed in her room to recover, comforting the daughter. Kenshin, impressed by the doctor's refusal to accept payment, learned from Denkichi how the doctor had helped him recover from a broken foot without charge. Dr. Elder thanked Denkichi for his help and invited Kenshin for tea as gratitude, which both men gladly accepted. At a fancy Western restaurant, their pleasant moment was interrupted by a spiral Rodashin, who couldn't take his eyes off Kenshin's sword. A spiral, holding a Western sword, left a fleeting yet tense impression. Afterward, Dr. Elder, Denkichi, and Kenshin enjoyed tea and cakes in the garden. Kenshin relaxed, and Denkichi made a celebratory gesture, which Elder found amusing. Denkichi suggested a tour of the city on his rickshaw. Kenshin declined due to his financial situation, so Denkichi suggested Kenshin carry the rickshaw while he directed. Despite Elder's suggestion to join, the rickshaw could only carry one person, leading to a rock-paper-scissors game that ended in draws. Eventually, they drew straws, resulting in Elder carrying the rickshaw and Kenshin as the passenger. Despite struggling to pull it, Denkichi helped push, and they embarked on their tour. The settlement, established by American missionary James Curtis Hepburn, promoted medicine and translated the Bible, leading to the Hepburn School's foundation. The Yokohama port, initially too shallow for large ships, had developed significantly since the Meiji Restoration. After a tiring journey, Elder swapped places with Kenshin, and they visited Yokohama Station, home to Japan's first train service in 1872. By the day's end, Denkichi proudly asked if they enjoyed the tour, which they did. He suggested Kenshin become a Yokohama native instead of a wanderer. Elder invited Kenshin to stay in his hotel room for the night. Kenshin was puzzled by Elder's change in footwear and noticed Elder seemed shorter. Kenshin, entering Elder's room without knocking, discovered that Dr. Elder was actually a woman. Flustered, Kenshin apologized for misgendering her. Elder, equally panicked, explained awkwardly, but Kenshin believed her. A hotel staff member delivered a message for Elder, which Kenshin received. Entering Elder's room, he was shocked by the revelation of her gender. Elder explained the Westerners' custom to swap genders as a joke, unknown to 19th century Japan. Meanwhile, Ishizu conspired with an older Westerner to eliminate Dr. Elder, deeming Yokohama his territory. He hired the man to avoid prosecution for killing a Westerner, describing Kenshin to ensure the job was accepted. The Westerner, recognizing Kenshin, accepted the task eagerly, anticipating the challenge of defeating a skilled swordsman like Kenshin. With Espiller's introduction out of the way, Ishizu began to explain his nefarious plans to make his medical practice profitable by spreading smallpox throughout Yokohama. But first, he needed to test Espiller's skills. Espiller drew his drill-shaped sword, designed for stabbing rather than slashing, and quickly defeated one of Ishizu's bodyguards, proving his prowess and signaling the countdown to his clash with Kenshin. Meanwhile, Kenshin was still taken aback by the revelation that Dr. Elder was a woman. She explained that she disguised herself to navigate the male-dominated medical field, where women were rarely trusted unless they were nurses or assistants. This rationale made sense to Kenshin, even though he noted her voice had given her away despite her efforts to thicken it. Elder mentioned her experience in one-person shows, playing both Romeo and Juliet, to illustrate her versatility. She didn't mind being a mysterious figure as long as she could save lives, which earned Kenshin's respect. Kenshin decided to leave, feeling it improper to stay at a woman's place. Before leaving, he pointed out that Denkichi and the woman Elder treated trusted her, affirming that she was on the right path. As he left the hotel, Kenshin reflected on his own past and the ways he had used his heightened Mitsurugi style. He recalled how, despite doubts about his ability to kill, he had done so without hesitation, believing that establishing a new era justified the means. This introspection reminded him why Elder disguised herself. Lost in thought, Kenshin remembered the message he was supposed to deliver to Elder, but hadn't. Meanwhile, Denkichi arrived to take Elder, assuming she had received the message. Along the way, it became clear that they had been lured into a trap when Espiller blocked their path. Denkichi tried to warn Espiller to move, but Espiller, already prepared, thrust his sword at Denkichi and Elder, destroying the rickshaw. Ishizu and his bodyguard watched from the shadows, pleased with the unfolding events. As Espiller interrogated Elder about Kenshin's whereabouts, Kenshin appeared, demanding he release her. Espiller, thrilled to face a samurai, challenged Kenshin to a duel to prove who was stronger. This revelation shocked Denkichi and Elder, learning that their savior was the infamous Hitakiri Badasai. Kenshin tried to explain that he had abandoned his past, but Espiller, believing Kenshin's possession of a katana was proof otherwise, insisted on the duel. With no choice, Kenshin accepted, prompting Espiller to release Elder and apologize for his rough treatment. The duel began, with Espiller launching a powerful attack that Kenshin narrowly dodged. Frustrated, Espiller intensified his efforts, but Kenshin continued to evade every strike. Espiller's superior was surprised by how evenly matched they were. Determined to win, Espiller unleashed a more powerful attack, twisting his body for maximum force. Kenshin blocked it with his sheathed sword, then unsheathed it to counter, pushing Espiller back. Espiller's defeat shocked Ishizu and the foreigner, who couldn't comprehend how Kenshin absorbed the brunt of Espiller's attack. With his sword broken and Kenshin standing before him, Espiller admitted defeat and asked Kenshin to finish him off. Kenshin revealed his Sakabato, a reverse blade sword he used to prevent killing. Amid this revelation, Ishizu, furious at Espiller's defeat, threw a bottle of smallpox at Elder. Elder tried to catch it but warned everyone of its contents, causing Ishizu's bodyguard to panic and throw it away. Denkichi prevented its fall, and Espiller, refusing to further tarnish his defeat, ensured the bottle's safety. Denkichi stopped Ishizu from escaping, and the foreigner surrendered. The next morning, Espiller, recovering in Elder's hotel room, thanked her despite feeling purposeless after his defeat. Elder, however, encouraged him. Later, Espiller and Elder met Kenshin at the port. Espiller thanked them for opening his eyes and introduced himself to Kenshin, who introduced himself as Rorani. Admiring Kenshin's decision to abandon his past, Espiller decided to switch his sword to serve as Elder's bodyguard in this new era. As they bid farewell, Elder expressed her gratitude to Kenshin, who had embraced Elder's advice to settle down and find peace among good people. Returning to the present, Yahiko wondered when the story took place. Kenshin revealed it was around 5 days before he arrived at the Kamiya Kenshin dojo. Megumi, intrigued by Kenshin's ability to smell flowers but not teeth, checked on him and was relieved to find he was fine. Kenshin had heeded Elder's advice to settle down, finding peace of mind and soul at the Kamiya dojo. As the Japanese Civil War raged on, Kenshin faced a significant challenge against Hajime Seidu, the leader of the 3rd Division of the Shinsengumi. Kenshin woke up from his slumber, startled by Yahiko and Kaoru, who urged him to go home since training was over. Kaoru and Yahiko had to snap the airheaded vagabond back to reality before dragging him home. Outside the dojo, Kaoru questioned Kenshin about his head being in the clouds, suspecting he was dreaming of the Bakumatsu period. Kenshin confirmed, mentioning he had seen the Shinsengumi in his dreams, much to Yahiko's surprise. The Shinsengumi, established by the Tokugawa Bakufu in 1863, comprised elite swordsmen from lower-tier samurais and commoners. They patrolled the streets of Kyoto, engaging in bloody encounters with imperialist swordsmen. Their power and discipline made the city's populace tremble. After their last stand in the 1869 Battle of Hakodate, the group effectively ceased to exist, but their legacy persisted. Kaoru dismissed the Shinsengumi's fighting style as unfair. Kenshin explained that their goal was to restore peace to Kyoto, even if their methods were harsh. Despite being enemies, Kenshin harbored no grudge against them, feeling saddened by their demise. In the Kamiya Kenshin dojo, Sanosuke waited impatiently for Kaoru and the others, hoping for some free food. A mysterious man named Goro Fujita entered, claiming to sell Ishida-powered medicine. Sanosuke, however, saw through the bluff. Goro revealed his true identity, drawing his sword and acknowledging his knowledge of Kenshin and Sanosuke. Sanosuke, unafraid, landed a powerful punch on Goro, but it had no effect. Goro counterattacked, demonstrating his superior combat skills from the Bakumatsu period. That evening, Kaoru worried about Kenshin's unusual behavior. Megumi appeared, suggesting she take care of him, much to Kaoru's dismay. Megumi managed to convince Yahiko and Kenshin to let her stay, despite Kaoru's reluctance. However, Megumi noticed Kenshin wasn't his usual self. Arriving at the dojo, they found a hole in the training room. Kenshin rushed in, smelling blood, and discovered Sanosuke injured with a broken blade in his shoulder. That night, Goro was called to drink sake with Shibumi in the red light district. After revealing that his name is actually Hajime Seidu, he politely refused to drink, explaining that alcohol gave him an excessive urge to kill. Shibumi cut to the chase, discussing Kenshin. Seidu revealed his progress but admitted his surprise at discovering Shibumi's role in Kirigasa's assassinations. Seidu sought amusement through killing, accepting Shibumi's side job to eliminate his arch-nemesis, Kenshin. Despite not understanding why Kenshin became a wanderer or why Shibumi wanted him gone, Seidu was eager for the task. Meanwhile, Kaoru and Yahiko worried about Sanosuke's condition while Megumi treated him. Kenshin investigated clues, suspecting the perpetrator was from the Shinsengumi. The evidence pointed to Hajime Seidu. Kenshin was unsure of Seidu's objective but knew Seidu's skills had not declined. The next day, Arundo mocked Seidu, expressing his dislike for him. Seidu suggested they cooperate to ensure the mission's success. Arundo, convinced, agreed to join the plan. Kenshin received a message from Seidu and decided to go alone, not wanting to involve anyone else. Arriving at the location, Kenshin realized he was tricked and faced an attack by Arundo. Kenshin quickly defeated Arundo, who, realizing his hopeless situation, begged for forgiveness. Kenshin, however, didn't believe Arundo's story but let him go. This was a mistake, as Arundo was bluffing and chained Kenshin. Now, Kenshin was at Arundo's mercy. Meanwhile, everyone at the Kamiya dojo remained unaware of the looming danger. When Yahiko came back home that evening, he informed Kaoru that Kenshin told him that he had some errands to run and that he might be back late. This sounded strange to Kaoru, as she knows that Kenshin does errands for no one other than her place. Before she could think of anything else, Yahiko concluded that it must have been a woman, much to Kaoru's dismay. As the two kept on their needless squabble, Seidu arrived at the dojo. Introducing himself once again as Goro Fujita, he went straight into business, asking them about where Kenshin could be found. This scared Kaoru and Yahiko for a moment, before learning from him that he heard about Kenshin from the police chief. Only then did the two feel relief. But when Kaoru learned that there is unconfirmed information that there are people targeting Kenshin, she became worried once again, so much so that she allowed Seidu to wait for him inside the dojo. Megumi also became worried when she heard the news from Kaoru, but couldn't help but be baffled at the latter when she told her that she's sure that they are the ones that got Sanosuke, even though Sanosuke is still alive. Still, that didn't stop Megumi from concluding that they should be taking extra care of themselves from now on. She also ensured Kaoru that Kenshin will be back safe and sound, and that Officer Fujita will keep them safe and sound as well, as she was just like Kaoru and Yahiko oblivious to what Seidu has been scheming. For Seidu, he couldn't help but check on his sword, only to be interrupted by Yahiko. He was surprised to see an officer carrying a katana instead of a European saber, to which Seidu answered that a katana is more sturdy and reliable, so he was given an special permission to use it instead. While Seidu was proceeding with his scheme in the Kamiya Kenshin dojo, Kenshin was in a precarious situation. Seeing that Kenshin was laying low, Arundo admitted that he, just like Seidu and Kurigasa before him, was hired by a politician to get rid of him. He decided to carry the order, even though he didn't know why they wanted Kenshin to be taken down so badly. As he kept on bragging, however, he was shocked to learn that Kenshin was still alive, so much so that he had to jump back. Now that he heard the entire story, Kenshin also mentioned that Seidu has been carrying assassination orders since the Bakumatsu era and the Civil War as a way to enforce discipline among members of the Shinsengumi. This has shaken Arundo's resolve further as he tried to throw Kenshin using his shackles once again. This time, however, Kenshin was prepared as he managed to land on his feet, drawing his sword with his mouth before jumping at Arundo to take him down. With the fighting over, Kenshin headed back home. He arrived there late at night with his morale low. Realizing that he was hurt, Kaoru confirmed what she heard from Officer Fujita. Hearing this, Kenshin sensed that something was off, as he never told Yahiko about what was going on with him in the first place, so how did she know about it? It was only when he entered the dojo that he figured out what was going on while he was outside. Seidu has entered the dojo to wait for him. Seidu couldn't help but mention how weaker Kenshin has grown since they last fought one another at the Battle of Toba Fushimi 10 years ago, while Kenshin revealed the identity of his nemesis. As mentioned, how could 10 years make a shrewd and formidable swordsman who fought fair and square on the field of honor become someone who's willing to commit every dirty trick in the book to get to his objectives? This sounded funny for Seidu, however, as he couldn't get himself to grasp that Kenshin is comparing him to an underdog. Or rather, a nobody like Arundo, since it was his new never kill anyone anymore doctrine that made him weaker. Kenshin, however, opposed this as he still firmly believed that he didn't need to kill people anymore to defeat Seidu. As he drew his sword, Seidu held firm onto his belief, mentioning every fight that Kenshin was involved in so far. From Kurigasa kidnapping Kaoru and Kanryu doing the same with Megumi, to Isurugi permanently injuring Utaro's arm, revealing that even though police officers were not involved in these cases, Seidu has been watching over everything from the shadows since he was after Kenshin from the get-go. Seidu also reminded Kenshin that they both believe that evil must be slain immediately, which is why he can't bear witness to seeing his arch-nemesis rot away just like that. Despite that, Kenshin held firm onto his doctrine. Realizing how futile his attempts to awaken the Batasai inside of Kenshin, Seidu prepared for battle. However, Kenshin still refused to draw his sword. As always, it only took him the threat of having his friends being injured to finally accept the duel. This time, Kaoru briefly stopped him as she was worried that he might not be back, but Kenshin assured her that he'll win. This time, Kaoru couldn't help but feel that this might be the last time she'll ever see Kenshin. With that out of the way, the duel began. Seidu was the one to attack first, but Kenshin managed to dodge it. Just as he was about to counterattack, however, he was completely exposed, so much so that Seidu managed to thrust his sword in Kenshin's body, throwing him away in the blink of an eye. As Kaoru and Yahiko stood in horror at such a sight, Seidu prepared himself to finish off Kenshin. As he charged at him, Kenshin managed to repel the attack, but he wasn't able to stop Seidu from pushing him against the wall. Worried that Kenshin might not only lose the duel, but his life too, Kaoru decided to stop Seidu from further attacking.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no. Get your ass on.
Kenshin, however, was still determined to see this fight to the very end. This time, he had those same eyes of a manslayer from his dark past. Seidu realized this, so he decided to prepare himself to repel Kenshin's incoming attack. However, Kenshin disappeared from his sight, but he still managed to react just in time, by kicking Kenshin away before he could get hit. What he didn't know, this was the last straw for Kenshin, be it if Seidu revived the Hitakiri Batasai once again, or that Kenshin have just snapped. None of that would matter now, as the fighting is about to go to a whole new level of bitterness. To clear any shadow of doubts, Seidu decided to use his ultimate technique against Kenshin, to which he confirmed that Kenshin had really snapped. Or so he thought, because Kenshin managed to dodge the second part of his attack, as he drew his Sakabato to strike a powerful hit on the back of Seidu's neck. If that was an actual katana blade, Seidu's head would be flying by now. Realizing that the Batasai have indeed awakened, Seidu promised to be the one to kill him, to which Kenshin pointed out that he'll be the one to do so instead. Hearing this, Kaoru was utterly horrified that she fell on her knees, begging for someone to put an end to this onslaught. The fighting continued, with both swords clashing relentlessly at an accelerating speed, until Seidu's blade broke once again, nearly hitting Yahiko. Yahiko, who had just assumed that Kenshin was just much sharper than usual, was told by Kaoru that that man is no longer Kenshin, but the Hitakiri Badasai, and that he must be stopped before he consumes Kenshin for good. Sanosuke, however, opposed this, arguing that both Kenshin and Seidu are now fighting as if they were in the Bakumatsu era, and that only the interference of someone from that era would put a stop to this mess. While this fighting was taking an upheaval, Okubo and Kawaji were on their chariot, in a race against time to catch up to what's happening. Even though his blade was broken, Seidu still decided to keep on fighting, much to Kenshin's amusement. With both sides losing their swords, the fighting turned into a bare-handed melee, which Seidu seemed to be winning when he turned his jacket around Kenshin's neck. Kenshin, or rather Badasai, still used his sword sheath to hit Seidu's jaw, gaining with that a much-needed breathing room. In the background, Kaoru was becoming increasingly horrified that she may lose Kenshin, so much that she began to desperately catch up to him as she was in tears, but to no avail. Just as Badasai and Seidu were about to finish this fight once and for all, Officer Kawaji came in just in time to stop this, as he ordered Seidu to come back to his senses, reminding him that his mission was to merely make a formal judgment on Kenshin's abilities. Still, Seidu refused this. It only took him the arrival of Okubo to put an end to this. Badasai's recognition of this former Satsuma commander and current home minister of the Meiji government of Okubo shocked his friends in the background, as they never expected that such a prestigious person would be watching over Kenshin's actions in the shadows. Their reaction was natural, since Okubo is the last of the great three of the revolution made of Katsura Kagoro, Takamori Seigo, and himself of course. Being the most accomplished figure of the three, he was rewarded by becoming the leader of the home minister. In fact, Okubo came in to discuss some matters with the Badasai, to which he was willing to hear, even if it was by force. In the background, Arundo was eavesdropping in shock, as he never expected this ordeal to involve a figure as big as Okubo. Realizing that there's nothing left for him to do, Seidu decided to report what he found so far as he was leaving. This left Officer Kawaji frustrated at the behavior of what he called the best spy in the Metropolitan Police. As for Badasai, Okubo asked him to accompany them to have a discussion, which he refused. Then suddenly, he punched himself, only for Kenshin to refuse this time, insisting that his friends here would listen as well. The way Kenshin came back to his senses relieved everyone, especially Kaoru, who hugged him so hard that she opened up his injury. As for Okubo, he decided to agree to what Kenshin demanded. Okubo decided to put it bluntly. Shishio is active behind the scenes in Kyoto, and to face this threat, Kenshin's help is required now more than ever. As Sanosuke began to wonder who this Shishio guy is, Kenshin did the introduction. Shishio Makoto was someone who rose to limelight during the Bakumatsu era, after joining the Imperialists from Choshu and quickly became a Shadow Hitakiri, which is like Kitakiri Badasai's successor. It was only a few key figures in the Imperialist faction that knew of his existence, as he always lurked in the shadows. Not even Kenshin had seen him before. What Kenshin wasn't able to comprehend, however, is what Shishio is doing, as he thought that he might have died a decade ago during the Civil War. It turned out that his existence was eradicated by his comrades, but he's still very much alive. Okubo explained that he wanted to discuss this matter in secret with Kenshin, as it was a confidential matter, to avoid having the government or Kenshin's loved ones get hurt. Back then, Shishio was just like Kenshin, another talented assassin that the Imperialists had hired. However, he was also an incredibly ambitious person, to the point he became a threat for the Imperialist faction altogether. He was hired as a shadow assassin and performed his duties to perfection, as he eradicated some of the most Imperialist figures that would overturn the foundation of the faction. Realizing that he'll turn into a corrupt official that could even wreck the government in the future, the faction decided to get rid of him in the chaos of the Civil War. To ensure that the assassination was carried out perfectly, the Imperialists poured oil on his corpse and lit it on fire. Despite all that, Shishio survived, and now he surrounded himself with lots of treasonous subordinates. His goal now is to gather a massive army that is based in Kyoto, in order to plot a war that will split the nation in two. This army that he had been gathering was in fact so powerful, that entire squads of the Imperial army that were sent after him were wiped out, and now the only hope left for the government is Kenshin. When Kaoru asked if the government wants Kenshin to assassinate Shishio, Okubo confirmed her answer, with Kawaji promising to compensate him for all his hard work later with as much money as he wants, as well as going as far as to turn a blind eye on any illegal activities committed by them, such as Megumi's previous involvement with the opium production. This didn't sound good to Sanosuke, who did put it bluntly that the government wants someone to clean up the mess that they have left, which led to an argument with Kawaji. Even though he couldn't understand most of the details, Yahiko mentioned that Kenshin would have met the same fate as Shishio if anything went wrong. He concluded that both then and now, the government is still assassinating and eradicating for their very own best interest, which may lead the nation into turmoil. Perhaps agreeing to what Yahiko said, Okubo didn't say a word. As for Kaoru, she refused Okubo's offer, as she made it clear that Kenshin isn't an assassin anymore, and it appeared that everyone around her agreed to this. Kawaji was outraged at this defiance, but Okubo concluded the meeting by giving Kenshin 1 week to think of this more thoroughly. As he was leaving, Kenshin couldn't help but mention that Okubo had gotten haggard compared to his prime. Elsewhere, Arundo informed Shibumi of what has happened so far, making it clear that he's going to bail out of this mess and head to Shanghai instead. Before he could even take a step outside the room, Seidu arrived, sending him to hell, where it's much safer than Shanghai as he claimed. Shibumi stood in horror as Seidu was walking ever closer to him, trying to bribe his way out of this in a last desperate attempt to save himself. In the end, it would all be for naught, as Seidu was determined to fulfill his duties to serve this nation. Now that a week has passed, Kaoru grew even more anxious of what Kenshin's answer might be, just like everyone else. As for Kenshin, well, he was just doing laundry like the ambitious donkey that he is, which understandably has pissed Sanosuke off. In fact, Kenshin has thought of this matter thoroughly, as he was well aware that Okubo wasn't acting out of self-interest, because Seidu would never think twice before slaying him if he ever did. He was confident that a person that has been corrupted to the core would never dare to utter the word justice, let alone believe in it, which isn't the case with Seidu. Despite his prideful nature, Kenshin made it clear that he's not someone that he can ever befriend, much to everyone's relief. As for what he will be doing, Kenshin decided to go to Okubo himself to inform him, even though Okubo promised that he'll come over himself to hear Kenshin's answer. Kenshin figured that Okubo is now a very busy man, so he might not be able to come. As for his whereabouts, Kenshin had an idea over where Okubo might be, so he's heading there immediately. This time, he decided to go alone. Despite Kaoru's concern, Yuhiko and the others were by her side to assure her that Kenshin will definitely come back. As for Okubo, he was on his way to Kamiya Kenshin Dojo, looking forward to hearing his final answer. What he didn't expect was that Shishio was already aware of what was the government already up to, so he sent his right-hand man after him, Seta Saojiru, to tell him that. It was quite a brilliant idea to try sending Himura Badasai as an assassin, but ultimately a futile resistance. I will take this country for myself. With these words, Seta ended Okubo's life. As the carriage was on its way, its route was cut by some swordsmen who were also after Okubo's life, so they got rid of the coachman first. But when they went to complete their mission, they were taken aback by Okubo's corpse falling off. Not knowing who was behind his assassination, one of the swordsmen decided that they would be the ones to claim it, with everyone rallying behind him. As such, these 7 figures will forever carve their names in history as the perpetrators involved in the Kizaka incident on May 14, 1878. When Kenshin arrived at the scene, he was horrified by what he found, only for Seta to walk next to him, warning him from opposing Shishio or else he'll meet the same fate. Unable to find where Seta was, Kenshin headed to the House Ministry building, where he told Kawaji and Seidu of what had transpired. Kawaji was devastated at this news. Amidst this, the governor of Fukushima, Yamayoshi Morisuke, arrived. He was the last person to ever talk to Okubo. In their last meeting, Okubo confessed that he was ashamed that he had barely achieved anything since he came to power. But he was fine with that, as solidifying the foundation of a nation would need 30 years at least, with the first 10 years of which being the first phase. As for the next 10 years, it should be the development phase, where they will tidy up internal affairs and fill its coffers. Even though he considered himself unworthy, Okubo still wanted to carry out those middle 10 years no matter what, as he decided to leave the last 10 years of which for the younger generation, to build and maintain the country. For Okubo, his dream was for Japan to be reborn as a nation-state, so the revolution will reach its true completion. Indeed, Japan will eventually grow and prosper despite all major setbacks, to become the juggernaut we know of today, where citizens would choose their own path. But back then, Seidu thought of it as being way too good to be true. Yamayoshi, however, still believed that it's an idea worth living for. In the streets, the news of Okubo's assassination is spreading like wildfire, while Kenshin was still thinking of his discussion over the matter with Seidu. With Okubo's death, the great 3 of the revolution have all perished, and now the government was left with only corrupted scums that are unfit to serve the role. From now on, Japan will go astray, and Shishio will do everything he can to capitalize on it. That night, as Sanosuke and Megumi left, Kaoru began to worry about Kenshin's delay. Thankfully, she didn't have to wait for much longer as he finally arrived, except his eyes were filled with sadness and bitterness, even though he never let go of his smile. He checked on Yuhiko, who got so tired from waiting that he fell asleep. He proceeded to inform Kaoru that Shishio was the one behind Okubo's assassination. As he was left with no other options, Kenshin has made up his mind. He will be heading to Kyoto to settle the score. Kaoru was left in disbelief as Kenshin, the peaceful, airheaded, and silly wandered, is heading back to Kyoto, where he potentially might never return. Kaoru tried to convince him that the Badasai inside him will never fully consume him, as he always snapped back to being Kenshin quickly, as it was the case against Kurigasa and Seidu. Kenshin, however, pointed out that he had reversed his blade against Kurigasa, as he was willing to get rid of him wholeheartedly, until Kaoru snapped him back into reality, and yet her voice didn't reach out to him in his fight against Seidu. The time started to flow again. When they first met, Kaoru kept Kenshin from leaving, even though she knew of how dangerous a man he was, which made him incredibly happy. But now, he won't just drag everyone with him into trouble, but this time into danger at every single opportunity, where he'll return to being his former self in each time. Besides, for the government, Shishio, and everyone who has a grudge against the Hidakiri Badasai, Kenshin is nothing more than Badasai, which is why he can't afford to stay here any longer. As he said these words, Kenshin hugged Kaoru, thanking her for everything she's done for him, before bidding her farewell. After all, he's a Rurouni, and now it's time for him to wander once again. Hearing this, Kaoru was inconsolable as she fell on her knees while seeing Kenshin going further and further away, deep into the pitch black shadows where Shishio Makoto awaits him. But that's a story for another time. That concludes the anime recap. As always, if you enjoyed, let me know down below and I'm out.